Belinda presents this unabridged recording of Meant to Be, written by Fiona McCallum and read by Jennifer Valetti. Dedication. In loving memory of my Nana, Nancy Price. Much treasured, long gone, but never forgotten. Chapter 1. Emily lay in bed with Jake spooning against her. As the first rays of daylight slowly lit the room, she was wide awake. But he slept on, his strong arms around her and his deep breathing stroking her back in long, warm whispers. She felt like leaping up and greeting the day, but couldn't bear to break the spell. Instead, she lay there with a warm glow in her belly, thinking that she could quite possibly be the luckiest girl in the world. She had a kind, gentle man who loved her and whom she loved in return, and she was so grateful to Simone for bringing about their reunion. The trip to Melbourne had changed everything. She was so glad she'd been there for Jake when he'd needed her. If only the circumstances had been different. Death had been such a theme in her life recently. Her grand's passing, John's fatal accident, and now the incident on Jake's worksite. Hopefully that was all behind her. She'd been through so much and survived, and she now knew she could get through anything else that came her way, especially with Jake by her side. After all the financial stress, she no longer had to search for a job, at least for a while. Thanks to her inheritance from John and the annual lease payments from Barbara and David on the land, and the income from the sheep, she was fine for the time being, and for life if she was careful. Emily still felt a little guilty about how it had all come about, but at least she had the blessing of John's parents. She just hoped the Wattle Creek locals would be as understanding. A townie, a woman inheriting a decent slice of prime land and everything with it was one thing, but how would they feel when they heard she'd moved a new man in just days after John's funeral? Speaking of which, she felt him stirring behind her. "Good morning, sleepyhead," Jake said, kissing the back of her neck. She rolled over to face him, kissed him deeply in reply, and wrapped her arms around him. She groaned as he pulled her towards him. Later they lay entwined, just like they had last night before going to sleep. Emily could feel her breathing matching Jake's, their chests rising and falling together. "God, you smell good," he said breathily. "I was just thinking the same thing," she said, smiling at him. "How are you feeling? Did you sleep okay?" After the flights from Melbourne, the long drive from Whyalla, and then David and Barbara staying on for dinner, they had both been exhausted. They had spent the next 2 days taking it easy, going on gentle strolls and making a huge fuss of Grace, who Emily had missed terribly whilst she'd been away. The little border collie was such an important part of her life. They'd been through so much together in such a short amount of time. "I slept okay, but I'm still pretty tired. I can't seem to shake it." Emily knew how debilitating grief could be. "I've got to go into town to run some errands. Do you want to come along?" Emily asked. After lingering over a big breakfast, they were standing side by side doing the dishes. Her hands in pink rubber gloves beneath a thick layer of suds, his tea-towel-covered hand stuffed into a mug. "If you don't mind, I'd rather stay here, if that's okay." Once upon a time she'd have been hurt. "Of course it's okay, Jake. We've both lived alone long enough to not need another person to entertain us all the time. Although don't get me wrong, I do enjoy your company," Emily added, starting to get a bit flustered. Isn't that what love was? Wanting to be with someone all the time? Jake let out a sigh. "It's not that I don't want to spend time with you. I do. But I'm just not used to having someone else around all the time." Emily nodded. You've probably only just got used to living alone. And I wouldn't mind betting you've quite enjoyed being independent," he said, looking at her sympathetically. "So, can we make a pact? Can we agree that it's okay to spend time apart without getting all paranoid about why? That it's not a sign there's something wrong between us?" "I guess," Emily said, not quite convinced. Where is this coming from? Maybe he's had a clingy girlfriend before. I don't mean to sound pushy, but I once had a girlfriend who came to stay and insisted on spending every second of every day together. It drove me nuts. Bingo. Sorry, the only peace I got was in the loo, he said with a gentle smile. It's fine, Jake. We all need our space, she said. So it's a pact? As long as we also agree that if one of us has a problem, big or small, we discuss it, Emily said. I don't want to end up where we were last time. Okay, Jake said. And while we're on ground rules, Emily continued. Oh, here we go, Jake said, smiling at her. Emily flicked a handful of suds at his chest. I'm being serious, she said. I want you to feel at home. Come and go as you please. But it would be helpful to know what meals you will and won't be here for. Now you're making me sound like a boarder. He went behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist and nuzzled at her neck. I mean it when I say I love you. I'm serious about us, about this working out, even though it's so new. I only meant I want to be free to head off for a walk on my own if I want to. I might not even want to. I love you too. And I mean it when I say I want you to feel at home. What's mine is yours. Honestly, you should feel free to use the car, internet, phone, whatever you need. They finished the last few dishes and then sat at the table to write up a shopping list. Jake gave her some money towards expenses, which she very reluctantly accepted, and she handed him the spare key to the sliding glass door. Right, last chance to change your mind, Emily said, collecting her handbag and keys from the bench. Sure you don't want to visit the thriving metropolis? I'll pass, thanks, Jake said, getting up and going over to her. I am looking forward to getting to know the area, but I don't think I'm ready to become the talk of the town just yet. I know what small towns can be like. I might just go for a stroll. Maybe take a few shots. I'm planning on being here for a while, so there's no rush. For anything. He gave her a peck on the lips. Have fun. You too. Gracie, you look after Jake for me while I'm gone, she said, bending down to ruffle the border collie's ears. Jake was standing at the glass door when she backed out of the shed and drove off. She returned his wave and the kisses he blew her. Before driving to town, Emily drove a short way up the road to run a quick errand. David had put the sheep on the stubble in the paddock over from the cottage ruins, where she and Jake could keep an eye on them. She'd promised to check the trough each day. Under their lease agreement, David was taking care of them in exchange for a profit share, but there was no point in him driving down just to check that a trough had water in it. After satisfying herself that all looked well with the trough and the sheep, she did a U-turn and headed off to Wattle Creek. Emily collected her mail and paid a couple of bills at the post office and visited the newsagent to get the advertiser for Jake. Being Thursday, Wattle Creek was swarming with people. Well, as busy as a district of 2,000 people could get. Tuesdays and Thursdays were the main shopping days, thanks to the delivery of fresh fruit and veg. Emily had to go around the block twice to find a park halfway between the bank and the supermarket where she could just pull in. She was no good at reverse parallel parking. As she walked the aisles, every second person stopped her to inquire if it was true that Donald and Trevor's cousin, Tara Wickham, had turfed her out of the house she had an arrangement with them to buy. And is it true that you've moved back to the farm? Yes, Emily said. There was no point in being evasive. When asked how John's parents, Thora and Gerald, were doing, she replied, "As well as can be expected," whilst kicking herself for her forgetfulness. She'd been in touch with Gerald by phone about John's estate, but hadn't seen them since the funeral. And they'd been so good to her the day she'd gone out and told them the truth about her and John. She vowed to keep in touch. At least without Jake beside her, she didn't have to deal with, "Ah, so who is this? And where are you from? And how long will you be visiting with us?" Locals, particularly the elderly, could be very nosy around newcomers. And then there would be the raised eyebrows along with, "So, you're staying at the farm with Emily, are you?" She could see how Jake moving in mere days after John had been laid to rest could be seen as inappropriate. It was hardly surprising that tongues were wagging. It had been fine while Jake could be seen as just a friend of her cousin Liz. But love doesn't work to a timetable. If only Jake had happened about a year into the future, she thought, as she stowed the 3 green eco bags of groceries in the boot. Then it would all be above board. She let out a deep sigh as she shut the lid. But he hadn't, Barbara would say. He was meant to be there now. The universe had all this stuff sorted out and everything happened when and how it was supposed to. Maybe so, but it still didn't make it any easier to deal with the gossip. Emily had sometimes fantasized about leaving Wattle Creek. But where would she go? The truth was, she couldn't see herself living anywhere else. And having already moved house twice in a matter of weeks, she was keen to stay put. Perhaps Jake would want to spend time in Melbourne down the track, and gradually she'd be able to tear herself away. Could she consider living there if that's what he wanted? God, who was she kidding? Other than seeing him and meeting his sister Simone, she hadn't enjoyed her trip to the big city at all. Dealing with all that traffic and so many people in such close proximity, practically running everywhere, was overwhelming. No, thank you very much. And the low cost of living was a major redeeming feature of life in the country. Just before Emily left town, she remembered to pop into the bank. She wanted to consult the spinning displays for term deposit and other investment brochures, but was also hoping to see Nathan Lucas, a friend who had recently moved to Wattle Creek from Adelaide to become the assistant manager. A few weeks ago, a lifetime ago it seemed, Nathan had wanted Emily to rent him a room in the house she'd bought from the Bakers. Correction, nearly bought. While she desperately needed the extra money, she'd turned him down. She'd needed more time on her own. Then she'd been evicted. Thankfully, they had remained friends. Thinking of Nathan made her realise with a bit of a shock that she didn't have many people she considered friends. She knew plenty of people to wave to in the street, say good day to, and chat about the weather. But there were very few she trusted enough to confide in. Only really her dad, David and Barbara, and now Jake. But surely it hadn't always been like this. What happened? Prior to getting married, when she'd worked in the insurance office, Emily had had lots of friends and had always felt a part of a community. But she'd become withdrawn whilst being with John. They'd had a few dinner parties in the first few months together, but then stopped. There hadn't been much fun. She'd done all the work in the kitchen, and John had just got drunk and belligerent. And their friends had never reciprocated. Or perhaps John had never passed on the invitations. Emily paused by the wall of the bank and pretended to study her shopping list. But what she was really doing was wondering how she'd come to have so few close friends. She was easy to get along with, wasn't she? She'd had plenty of girlfriends in high school and during her 20s. But one by one they had moved away to the city in search of work and men. She'd just moved to the next small town over. And then she'd married John, and he'd become her world. Stepping inside the bank, she spotted Nathan in his glass-walled office, tapping away at his computer keyboard. When he looked up and saw her, he grinned and waved her over. "Come in," he said, pecking her on the cheek. "Sit down, take a load off," he added, and slumped back into his chair. "How are you settling in?" Emily asked. "Have you found somewhere to live yet?" "Yep. One of the girls from the other bank, Sarah Poole, has a spare room. They provide housing for the assistant manager. I'm clearly with the wrong bank. Isn't it a conflict of interest or something? You mean sleeping with the enemy? He winked. No idea. I'll just have to spend more time with my non-bank friends, like you. So, how are things? Great. Speaking of housemates, remember I told you about my friend Jake in Melbourne who came for Christmas? Well, he's staying again. Hopefully for a few months. Hopefully forever. Oh, do I detect romance? You do indeed, Emily said, blushing slightly. Well, I hope you checked his horoscope before letting him move in. And I hope you've checked your compatibility with Sarah, she said with a laugh. I have, actually. And you might scoff. But take it from me, you can save yourself a lot of heartache if you ask the question up front. As a Capricorn, you need a Taurus or a Virgo. But your love life is your business, I've said my piece. Just being a friend and looking out for you. Thanks, Nathan. I appreciate it, she said, wondering about Jake's birthday. He knew that hers was New Year's Eve because he'd sent the lovely plans for the baker's house to Barbara and David's that night. But when was his? So, did you just drop in to say hi, or was there something of a banking nature I can help you with? Well, I did want to say hi, but I've been thinking I should look at some investment options. How are you going with settling the estate? Okay, I think. It seems to be just a matter of putting information together and applying for probate. I've mainly let the lawyers deal with it. John's dad was kind enough to send them a list of assets, which saved me a lot of palaver. Hopefully in 2 months it'll all be rubber-stamped. That's good. I've heard these things can be a nightmare. Well, it helped that John was recently bought out of the family company and had plenty of cash on hand for me to pay the outstanding bills. Phew for that! Yes. There was also an insurance policy. The payout from that should come soonish. And then there will be the proceeds from the estate to think about. I want to be sensible, do the right thing for my long-term future. Right then, let's see what we've got to offer. Nathan ran through some of the bank's choices, the interest rates, potential returns and costs involved, but said if she was talking about investing large amounts, she should probably think about seeing one of their visiting financial planners at some point. By the time he finished, Emily's head was swimming. Hey, do you and Jake want to go and do some wineries or have lunch sometime? Sarah's quite new in town too, and we need to make some friends. I'd love to. I should give Jake a proper welcome too. Maybe over the weekend they could all splurge on lunch with Barbara and David. Emily hadn't visited any of the cellar doors that had popped up on the far side of the district in the past few years. Her deceased husband hadn't been one for romantic Sunday drives. Farming, football, beer and sex were the extent of John's interests, but she was really looking forward to playing tourist with Jake. God, this is just like high school all over again, isn't it? Nathan said. Ha ha. I'll see what suits Jake and let you know. And then Emily was on her way back out of town, thinking again about what a whirlwind the past few months had been. When she'd driven away from the farmhouse that day with Grace curled up on the passenger side floor of the car, she'd hoped, it would be the last time she would ever drive this particular dirt road. And now look where she was. Life certainly was full of surprises. Lost in her thoughts, Emily was suddenly jolted by 2 hard clunks as first the front tyre and then the rear one hit a large pothole, one she usually managed to avoid. She slowed. The car seemed to be okay, so she continued on. But one thing was for sure. When the insurance payment came through for John's written-off ute, she would definitely replace it. Now that she owned a farm, she really needed something all-terrain. But what sort? And should she keep the car as well, or was running 2 vehicles too extravagant? She was glad she had Jake to discuss these sorts of things with. Proud as she was of her newfound independence, there certainly were benefits to having a man around. Chapter 2. Hi, honey, I'm home, Emily called, smiling to herself. What a cliché. I sound like a character from a soap opera. She dumped the 4 heavy bags of groceries onto the lino floor of the kitchen, then rolled the stiffness out of her neck and shook the circulation back into her fingers. "Jake?" She shut the sliding glass door she'd shouldered open moments before. He mustn't be far away to have left the door unlocked, she thought. Emily quickly unpacked the groceries, all the while listening for movement. If Jake was inside, he would almost certainly have come to help carry everything in. He was that sort of guy. And Grace would normally have bounded up to greet her. She wandered through the house but found no trace of either. By the time she finished, she was starting to get concerned. She checked her watch. Almost 2 p.m. She went to the bedroom to change into her farm clothes, thinking she'd look for them outside. Maybe Jake and Grace were exploring and hadn't heard her return. Entering the room, she said hello to Granny Rose via the big jar of buttons on the tall boy. The old Bushell's coffee jar had been her Gran's last gift to her, and together with its precious contents, it meant more to her than anything. Emily wrapped her hands around the cold glass and put her chin on the rough, slightly rusty, faded red lid. Again she found herself wondering if Gran had remembered the rough diamonds in there amongst the buttons. The frustrating thing was that she'd never know. But she would have treasured it anyway, even if it weren't for the diamonds. Being a sentimental romantic, Emily loved the button jar for the symbolism it held. Trust Gran to hide her wedding gift from the Indian prince in there. Was it before or after that, because of the precious stones, that she'd decided never to take any buttons out? Over the years, Emily had seen many added, usually when Gran was cutting up worn-out clothes for rags, and had never understood why Gran would drag her off to the shop to buy new buttons whenever she needed one. One of her favourite things to do as a child, well, actually even now, was to rotate the tightly closed jar and listen to the hiss, whoosh and rattle the different buttons and other objects made against themselves and the glass. She couldn't believe that in all that time she'd never spotted one of the 7 diamonds lurking about in there. Or perhaps she had, and had dismissed them as one of the other strange things Gran had added over the years. Old coins, buckles, hair clips, the odd seashell. It wasn't like diamonds in the rough were anything that would catch your attention. But what a beautiful sentimental gift. Emily thought about the prince's letter, the evidence that the family story had been no myth. When Jake had first discovered the diamonds, she had immediately wanted to phone her mother up and gloat, "See, Gran was telling the truth." But that would have opened one big old jack-in-the-box, and there was no way Jack could be stuffed back in again. She had since decided to keep them a secret. If they found out, Enid and Aunt Peggy would no doubt argue they belonged to them as heirs, and then they'd cash them in for sure. Emily was grateful every day for whatever had caused Gran to thrust the button jar into her arms on that last visit, rather than see it end up amongst all the things they'd had to sort through after her death. Back then she wouldn't have had the courage to defend her choice of keeping such an obviously sentimental and apparently worthless item. She was now much more able to stand up for herself. "Oh, Gran," she whispered. "I wish you were here to meet Jake. You'd love him." As she absently glanced out of her bedroom window, she looked past the ugly steel skeleton of the half-built hayshed to the pile of rubble behind it. Once it had been her beloved cottage, before John had taken a front-end loader to it. Something caught her eye. Jake's red shirt. It stood out like a beacon against the pile of pale limestone around him. He was sitting amidst the ruins of the cottage, leaning against the base of what had once been the stone chimney to the original outdoor kitchen. Grace was lying at his feet. Emily hugged the button jar again, put it back down on the tall boy, and got changed. As she made her way over to the pile of rubble, she wondered if she would feel less sad about it if she had it removed. Would she eventually forget what had been there and who had been responsible for its demise? "Hey there, you two," Emily called as she approached. Jake looked like he might be snoozing, and she didn't want to startle him. He and Grace were mostly in the shade, but their legs were stretched out in the sun. Grace raised her head and slapped her tail a couple of times before lying back down and becoming still again. "Hello," Jake said, smiling up at her. "How was the thriving metropolis and cesspit of gossip?" "Thriving," Emily said, smiling back. "You look like you've found a good spot." "Sure have. Care to sit?" He patted the smooth patch of earth beside him. "Don't mind if I do," she said, sitting down. Grace immediately got up, stepped over Jake's outstretched legs, and flopped down with her head in her mistress's lap. "Hello, girl," Emily said, giving Grace's ears a rub as the dog stared up at her adoringly. "I thought you'd traded me in for Jake." "Not a chance. She was just being polite to the new guy, weren't you, girl?" Jake said, reaching over and patting the dog's belly. As he leant back again, he paused to kiss Emily. Her heart surged. "So, what did you guys get up to while I was out?" Jake checked his watch. "I've actually been sitting here the whole time you've been gone," he said, frowning. "Really?" She looked at him closely. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." "Are you sure? If you've been sitting here all this time without realizing—"
"Really, I'm fine. Just feeling a bit washed out."
"You'd tell me if there was something wrong, wouldn't you?" She watched as he plucked at the dried grass. "Jake, I'm worried about you. Is it about Shane?" Emily's heart began to race a little. Jake shook his head but kept his gaze down. "There's a psychologist in town, Jacqueline Havelock, if you think she might be able to help. Or there's Dr. Squire, though it can take a while to get in, one of the pitfalls of country life." She shut her mouth abruptly, aware she was babbling. She was scared. What was going on with him? Jake looked up and fixed his gaze on her. He looked worse than a bit washed out. There were beads of sweat on his forehead. As he brought his hands into his lap, she saw that they were shaking.
"It's not a big deal. I didn't want to worry you. I don't want to worry you."
"Now you are worrying me." She tried to sound light-hearted, but failed. He grasped her hands and took a deep breath.
"Last week, before you came to Melbourne, I saw my GP.
"Okay, that's good. And?" Emily didn't like prying, but poor communication had been a problem for her in the past. It had almost lost her Jake and her two best friends, Barbara and David, and she was determined not to repeat her mistakes. She bit her lip in an effort to wait out his excruciating silence.
"I'm fine. Well, I will be fine in time. I need to take it easy for a bit. Lots of rest. My GP thinks I have adrenal fatigue, but we'll know more when she gets my test results back."
"Is it like chronic fatigue syndrome?"
"Quite different as far as I can tell. With chronic fatigue, you're always exhausted and just want to sleep. With me, I'm often fuzzy and weary, but not in the way I want to actually sleep. I'm quite tired in the mornings, but I seem to often get a second wind in the afternoons and evenings."
"I've noticed that. In Melbourne, and the other night with Barbara and David.
A lot of the time I feel jittery. It's like a fight or flight response, surging adrenaline, but for no reason, and you can't stop it."
"You poor thing, it sounds awful. Did something happen other than Shane's death, or is it because you're too stressed? Until I saw you in Melbourne, you always seemed so okay with everything."
"I'm always busy with work and I've usually got a lot on my mind. I guess I just accepted that. But Shane's death seems to have triggered something, tipped me over the edge."
Emily felt terrible that their tiff might have contributed to his stress as well. "So, did something happen, something specific that saw you go and see your GP?"
On Thursday morning, I think it was Thursday anyway, last week is all a bit of a blur, I was watching the news on TV. Suddenly the noise seemed miles away and I couldn't make out the specific voices. It was like everything was distorted, out of focus. And then I couldn't get up. I felt glued to the couch. My heart started racing, I was sweating, and when I thought about what I was meant to be doing, I couldn't remember. I couldn't think. It was terrifying. I didn't know what was happening to me, if I was having some sort of seizure or stroke. Eventually, things became clear again, like coming out of a fog. I'd probably only been like that for minutes, maybe half an hour, but I felt like I'd lost a whole day. I didn't know what else to do, so I phoned the clinic. I was really freaked out. Thankfully, they could fit me in that morning.
God, you poor thing.
I guess it's being based in a city and dealing with so many stressed people, but my GP picked it straight away. She thinks the test results are just a formality. It'll be good to know for sure, but it won't really change anything. Regardless, she wants me to take 3 to 6 months off.
Can you afford to take that much time off?
I don't see I have a choice. If it happens again, there's a chance I could find myself totally catatonic, like a complete shutdown, and not be able to move. Imagine if it happened when I was driving.
That's a scary thought.
So I'm looking at Shane's death as a big wake-up call. If there's one thing good that can come out of that, I'll take it. What's the point of working so hard if it's just going to kill you? I've got some good people working for me, and Sim's got someone in mind as project manager. I'm not too concerned about the business. And I'm fine for money, thanks to a good insurance policy. I have to focus on getting better at this stage, just take each day as it comes. It's all about playing it by ear and listening to my body, really.
So Simone knows everything?
Yes.
Sometimes Emily wished she had a sibling to confide in. And there really isn't any specific treatment?
Just lots of vitamins and long walks in the country. Watching my stress levels and concentrating on getting myself healthy through diet and exercise. I've cut way down on caffeine too. I was drinking coffee right through the day. I had no idea how many cups I was having. I always had one on the go in the office.
Actually, I had noticed you weren't drinking so much coffee. And I did wonder about all the vitamins you've been taking.
Yes, I practically rattle in the mornings now.
You know you can always talk to me about things. If this is going to work, I don't want there to be secrets between us.
Thanks for understanding,
Jake said, pulling her to him and kissing her. Of course. I love you, she said, snuggling into him. I'll take good care of you.
I love you too.
After a short cuddle, they sat back and spent a few moments looking about in silent contemplation. Jake was the first to speak.
It's such a shame about the cottage because there really is something quite magical about this place. It's got good energy or something.
I felt that the first time I came over here, Emily replied, picking up a small stone from beside her. I thought it was the building, but perhaps it's the trees and nearby creek.
Well, I can certainly see why they chose here for their home, Jake said.
In front of them, the dry creek bed twisted its way through the paddock. The stream would have run most of the year before they dammed it way back up in the hills in the 1950s. Why does progress have to be so brutal on the environment? Emily said wistfully, running a hand through Grace's soft fur.
It doesn't have to be. The old and new can coexist. I've made a business out of blending them. It just takes some thought and sometimes a bit more effort.
I bet it isn't easy convincing people to keep the old when the new is so often cheaper.
The people who approach me tend to know and like my work and be serious about having me involved. There's not a lot of convincing to be done. I guess I've been lucky that there are enough people out there who still have a conscience and also appreciate traditional aesthetics. Speaking of aesthetics, what are you going to do with that? Jake said, nodding towards the half-built hay shed a little way off.
David said he could use the extra storage, so I wouldn't mind it moved down to the end of the other sheds. I don't know why John didn't put it there to start with, she said, shaking her head.
I had a quick look on my way past. Jake continued. It's just bolted together like a giant Meccano project. Shouldn't be hard to deconstruct. Yeah, that's what I thought, Emily said, rolling her eyes. But I've learnt my lesson about trying to do it on my own. She was still embarrassed about not knowing how to start the tractor and then getting stuck up the ladder, but was starting to see the funny side of the incident. Thank goodness Barbara and David came along when they did. I might have been stuck up there forever. Oh, I think between the two of us we might be able to manage it, Jake said, patting her knee. But perhaps it would be more sensible to get David involved. He'd know more about this sort of thing than me. I'll ask him. I would so love not to have to look at it from the bedroom window each morning, and all this rubble, she added. What do you think I should do about it? John said he was going to just push it into the creek. I've been sitting here wondering the same thing myself. And? I reckon we sort out that monstrosity and then tackle this. One thing at a time. What do you say? Fair enough. Now, would you like something to eat? I know it's late, but I got some fresh rolls and ham from the bakery. Sounds perfect, he said, getting up and then holding out a hand to help her up. They walked back to the house with their arms around each other and Grace bounding ahead of them. Hey, Jake? Yeah? When's your birthday? Since you know mine, it's only fair. April 23rd. I'm coming up to 36. Okay, great. I'm a Taurus, which I understand is highly compatible with Capricorn. You, he added with a cheeky grin. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, really? Cool, Emily said, impressed at how nonchalant she'd managed to sound. I don't know much about astrology, she added with a shrug, and put a little skip into her step. Chapter 3. An hour later, Jake had just announced he was making a bolognese sauce for dinner when the phone started to ring. Would you like me to get that? He asked, reaching for the handset. If you don't mind. Hello? Jake said into the phone. Yes, this is Jake. Oh, hi, Enid, he said, looking at Emily with raised eyebrows and a smile. She felt herself become tense. She hadn't yet told her mother about him moving in. A couple of days ago. We came back from Melbourne together. Oh, right. Well, it all happened rather suddenly, he said. Yes, I did. It was a bit of a shock, but thankfully not a close friend. I'll leave it to him to tell you all about it, Jake said, his eyes fixed on her. Let me hand you... How long am I staying? I'm not sure yet. Look, Enid, it's been lovely talking to you, but Emily is here now and I have something I must attend to. He handed the phone over with a look of huge relief and headed off into the pantry. Hi, Mum, what can I do for you? Emily said, watching Jake returning with onions and mince. You didn't tell me you were bringing Jake back from Melbourne? Well, as Jake said, it all happened rather quickly. Chopping board is under the sink, she said in response to Jake's chopping charade, holding her hand over the mouthpiece. And are you going to tell me why you had to run off in such a hurry? Your father said it was for a funeral. Yes, someone Jake knew. I went to support him. So why is Jake staying with you? He just needed a break away, Mum. Tomato paste and herbs are in the pantry. Sorry, only dried, she whispered to Jake, who nodded in return. He was getting everything out before starting to chop. She smiled. It was the same way she cooked. Well, it must be serious between you if you drop everything and race off to Melbourne. You just ended your marriage, for goodness sake. Emily sighed. Mum, was there a particular reason for your call? She probably sounded a little rude, but it was better than mind your own bloody business, which was dangerously close to the tip of her tongue. We haven't spoken for a couple of days, Enid said, sounding indignant. I just wanted to make sure you had settled back in okay. Yes, all is well. I'm fine, thank you. Can I go now? She knew she should ask Enid about her own last few days, but couldn't muster the energy to listen to the ensuing 20 minutes of waffle. Look, Mum, it's a bit rude of me chatting on the phone when I have a guest. If there was nothing else?
Oh, there is, actually. Your father and I are heading out. We'll be there in around 30 minutes. Put the kettle on. Now? It was Emily's turn to shoot Jake a stricken look. That really isn't convenient, she said. She mouthed and made hand gestures that she hoped he'd understand. She was too rabbit-in-the-headlights stunned to actually speak the words out loud. His response was a series of hand movements which she translated into, "You and me are going for a drive." "Are you still there, Emily?" "Yes, but Mum, we're actually heading out in a few minutes." "Where are you going?"
Oh, shit.
I'm going to show Jake around." "Oh, I love a nice drive. We can all go together. You can just wait for half an hour." "No, Mum, we have somewhere to be and are already running late. We'll have to catch up another time," she said. "But I thought you were just going for a drive," Enid said. "Thanks for the call, Mum. Gotta go. Bye," she said, and hung up. Emily suddenly felt very heavy. She sat down on the nearest chair.
Not good at taking hints, is she?
Jake said. "That's the understatement of the century."
You couldn't have made it more obvious.
"I wouldn't be surprised if she turns up in half an hour or so."
"Well, we won't be here,"
Jake said, gathering up the ingredients and taking them back to the fridge and pantry. "But don't you want to cook that for a few hours?"
"I'll do it tomorrow instead," he said over his shoulder. "Your mother needs to learn that no means no. Anyway, I need to take you on a proper date. Come on, you got 10 minutes to get back into your jeans," he said, grasping her by the hand and leading her out of the kitchen.
"We could pretend we're not here," Emily said, pulling him close as they entered the bedroom.
"Somehow, I don't think Enid would believe you weren't here if the car was still in the shed. And I don't think we should be stooping to hiding it or ourselves. You're allowed some privacy, Em. She'll just have to learn that."
"Thanks, Jake. I probably would have just given in to her."
"Like I usually do." "Happy to help."
"I feel a bit mean."
"There is absolutely nothing wrong with saying no, Emily. You're an adult. You're allowed your own life. Come on, we better get out of here. You stay here, okay, Gracie?"
Grace looked up from her cushion on the floor and flapped her tail. In less than 15 minutes they were locking the glass sliding door. Emily had hesitated at the bathroom mirror, thinking that she ought to put on some makeup. But Jake had wrapped his arms around her from behind, kissed her on the cheek and said to her reflection in the mirror,
"No need for that. You look perfect just the way you are."
Emily smiled and grabbed his hand. She had never been much into clothes and makeup. Throughout her 20s, she'd religiously slathered stuff on her face and carefully added colour to her eyes, lips and cheeks. But she'd never enjoyed doing it and didn't like leaving the house feeling not quite herself. What was wrong with looking natural anyway? And why the hell should she put on all the ridiculous war paint for a man? Look where that had got her. She hoped Jake wasn't just being nice because she was done with all the try-hard crap. She'd leave that to younger women. Not that she was unkempt. Emily was always clean, tidy and presentable and did wear makeup for evenings out and special occasions. She just couldn't be bothered trying to look like she was ready for a magazine shoot every time she left the house.
"I like that you don't wear makeup every day,"
Jake said, over the crunch of the rubble as they walked over to the car. "Thanks, Jake," she said, smiling at him.
"I honestly don't know how you women do it."
"No, whenever I wear it, I tend to spend the whole time feeling like I need a damn good scrub."
"Well, it's lucky I love you just the way you are then, isn't it?" Jake said, and pulled her to him more firmly. "Now, shall I drive since it's our first proper date?"
"That would be lovely," Emily said, beaming. She gave him a peck on the cheek before making her way around to the passenger's side. But Jake darted ahead of her and opened the door with his left hand while giving a flourish with his right.
"My lady?"
"Why, thank you, kind sir," Emily said, and got into the car. Jake went back around to his side and then climbed in. But instead of starting it up, he turned to her.
"You know we won't be able to hide from Enid forever, don't you?"
Emily frowned.
I'm learning to say no to her. I am. And I really do appreciate your support. Far too often it's just easier to give in.
Short-term gain, long-term pain, he muttered. Anyway, you did stand up to her. You said no, she just didn't listen.
You know, leaving John was probably the first time I've ever really stood up to her. And that was mostly because of my love for Grace and need to protect her, not... She fiddled with the strap of her handbag in her lap.
Yes, but it overrode your habit of just falling into line. I know she seems to be very, how shall I put it, self-righteous? But surely she just wants to see you happy. I would have thought that was the most basic mothering instinct of all, to protect your child from pain.
I honestly don't think my mother cares about my happiness, Emily said sadly. She hadn't really meant to say the words aloud. Or if she does, it comes a distant second to, I will not have my daughter embarrass me by daring to divorce. And yes, before you say it, she said, holding up a hand, I am fully aware this is not the 1950s.
Oh, well, as frustrating as she can be, I think what you have to do is limit the impact of her behaviour. Each of us is responsible for our own well-being. And, playing devil's advocate for a moment, she is your mother. As much as she drives you mad, at least you still have her in your life to drive you nuts.
I know. And I'm sorry you and Simone lost your parents when you were so young.
Thanks, but I didn't say it for sympathy. I've had plenty of years to come to terms with it. Hopefully you'll come to terms with Enid one day and accept that she just is the way she is. I mean, if we ever have kids, I'd like them to have their grandparents in their life.
Crikey. Kids? Where did that come from?
Emily nearly poked her finger right through the leather of her handbag. Emily couldn't picture Enid as a doting grandparent letting kids run around her immaculate home, but had to concede that people did continue to have the capacity to surprise. She blinked back the initial shock and looked up and across at him.
You want kids then?
She asked. One day, of course. Do you?
One day.
There was a moment of silence, as if Jake was going to say something. Instead, he turned the ignition. Emily put her handbag at her feet, took a deep breath, and settled back into her seat. Well, let's get out of here before we get caught. I must say I do like your dad, Jake said, as he carefully backed the car out of the shed.
Me too.
Emily felt a familiar stab of guilt. She'd sold Des Oliphant short for so many years, assuming he was gutless when all the time he was most likely biding his time and choosing his battles wisely. She wished her father had been more influential in her upbringing than her mother. Maybe then she'd have chosen her life partner better and not have had the mess of the past few months to deal with. So, which way? Jake asked, idling at the end of the short driveway beside the house.
Left if you don't want to risk bumping into Mum and Dad. They'll be coming from that way if they come, she said, indicating with her head. It's a 40-minute drive to the nearest winery, but we don't have to go all that way if you don't want to. We can just drive around.
I don't mind if you don't. Let's do a bit of exploring and then have an early bite to eat if we see somewhere we like the look of. Sound like a plan?
Perfect. Left here, and then the next right, and then left. We'll take the back roads, the scenic route.
Emily took them along a road where a number of partial ruins, abandoned stone cottages, and larger homesteads were scattered about the undulating landscape. Most were constructed from pale cream, almost white limestone, the same as her cottage ruins, but a few were of the darker brown ironstone. Jake stopped wherever a building was close enough to take a photo without trespassing. A number of times Emily tried to assure him that the owners really wouldn't mind them entering the property for a closer look, but he said he'd rather get their permission first. She liked how respectful he was about everything. Eventually they turned onto the bitumen highway, drove a few more kilometres, and then turned in at a glossy painted sign swinging in the slight breeze that read, Ocean View Winery, open. Vineyards have only been in the area a few years, hence how bare everything looks, Emily explained. And cellar doors with cafes and restaurants have only really started popping up in the past 12 months. What she didn't say was that she hadn't been to one before. Jake let the car roll on slowly across a large rubble car park where a few young, spindly gum trees had been planted. They would make good shade one day and return some of the character to the area, Emily thought. She cast her eyes down the undulating landscape with its neat rows of bright green vines on their timber and wire trellising. The scene was very striking against the wider patchwork of pale yellow, grey and brown stubbles remaining from the recently harvested winter crops. They were on a small rise, and in the far distance she could just make out the blue of the Spencer Gulf. Isn't it a shame they left those lovely stone buildings back there to rot? They could have reused one of them instead of putting up something completely new, Jake said, bringing the car to a halt. Emily was having the same thought at the same moment. Don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of corrugated iron, he continued. I just think it's sad to see all that old charm and quality workmanship going to waste. Emily agreed, looking at the structure in front of them. Its high-pitched roof and row of skylights gave it a certain charm, but still it looked somehow temporary. Perhaps when the trees and shrubs grew, it would look more in keeping with the surrounding landscape. They parked, got out, and walked across to the building. She followed Jake through the bank of cafe doors and looked about at the interior. Concrete, corrugated iron, and visible steel beams. At first glance, the place was just a shed with nicer doors and windows. Though looking more closely, she realised that only the main beams were visible. The building was lined in corrugated iron, no doubt with insulation between the inner and outer sheets. There was a solid timber bar running almost its whole length. Emily was turning around and slowly taking it all in when she heard a familiar voice. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." Her face lit up as her gaze settled upon a couple at a table in the corner. "Barbara, David, what are you guys doing here?" She rushed over and hugged them both. "The riffraff they let in," Jake said, grinning at them. "Hello, you two." He hugged Barbara and shook David's hand. "Sit, sit," Barbara urged, patting the wooden bench beside her. "What can I get you to drink, Em?" Jake asked, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Their rosé recently won a prize," Barbara said. "Would you like one, Barbara?" "David?" Jake said. "No, thanks, we're having an alcohol-free day," David replied. "At a winery?" Emily laughed. "We came for coffee and hot chocolate." He suddenly seemed a little uncomfortable, and Barbara was looking down at her hands in her lap. "Another bottle of water, then?" Jake asked, picking up the empty one. "That'd be good, thanks," Barbara said. "Yes, water, thanks," David said. Emily noticed her friends visibly relax. So what if they didn't want to drink? She wasn't about to make them feel awkward by quizzing them on it. In her opinion, most people drank far too much anyway. "Em?" Jake asked. "I think I'll just have water too, thanks," she said, smiling at him. "Rightio," Jake said cheerily. "Water all round it is, then." He tucked the empty bottle under his arm, collected David and Barbara's used mugs, and walked the few metres across to the bar. Emily sat down next to Barbara, who leaned in towards her. "Jake's looking a little brighter," Barbara said. "Yes, he is, isn't he?" Emily watched him. They didn't know about Jake's adrenal fatigue, but this wasn't the time to share. "He'll be fine. It'll just take some time," she replied. "And plenty of fresh country air and TLC from you," David said. Jake returned with a bottle of water and 4 glasses. He sat next to David across the table from Emily. "To good friends," Barbara toasted, when they each had a glass in hand. "Good friends," David, Emily and Jake replied, and they all clinked glasses to complete the ceremony. "We would have invited you to join us, but we thought we'd give you your space," Barbara said, after they'd all taken a sip. "Wasn't expecting to run into you lovebirds quite so soon." she added with a knowing expression, which caused both Jake and Emily to blush slightly. Actually, we're hiding from Mum, Emily said with a laugh. Oh? She phoned and then wouldn't take no for an answer about dropping by for coffee, Jake said. So we decided to give her a little wake-up call. Oh, bravo, Barbara said. I told her it wasn't convenient, that we were heading out, Emily said. And she said she was coming over anyway, right? Barbara said. How did you guess? Jake laughed. If I hadn't got all insistent, she'd probably be interrogating poor Em as we speak, he added, stroking Emily's hand that was wrapped around her glass on the table. So, here we are. Good. I've been telling her for ages she needs to redraw the boundaries, Barbara said. She was doing okay, just needed some reinforcement, Jake said. But I'm here now. Hello, people. I'm sitting right here. So, other than hiding from the lovely Enid, we're actually here on our official first date. And what are you guys doing so far from home? Jake asked. First date, eh? About bloody time, David said jovially. Yes, Barbara agreed. Here's to many more. David raised his glass and they again went through the ritual. And here we are making you celebrate with water, Barbara added with a tight laugh. You're not making us do anything, Emily said. Well, anyway, it's just lovely, Barbara said. So? Jake asked, looking from David beside him to Barbara across the table with raised eyebrows. So what? David said nonchalantly, though Emily didn't buy it for a second. Jake continued to look at them expectantly. Oh, us? Oh, well, we're, David stammered, looking at Barbara. We're actually here celebrating the anniversary of the day we met, Barbara cut in. Yes, David said, taking a slug of water. Silly, really, Barbara added, looking down at the table. Not at all, Jake said. I don't think we do nearly enough celebrating, Emily said emphatically, trying to cover up the slight unease that seemed to be hanging over them all. Something just wasn't quite right. Not actually between David and Barbara. They were as close as ever. Just as she had the thought, they exchanged another doe-eyed look. Right, who's for one of these wood-fired pizzas? David said, picking up the stiff laminated menu cards from the end of the table. He handed them each a copy. Emily reluctantly dragged her mind back from her misgivings, accepted the card with a thank you, and tried to focus on the long list of pizzas on offer. It took them 10 minutes to decide they would share one large pizza, half gourmet meat for the guys and half barbecue chicken and roast capsicum for the girls. After they ordered, Jake raised the topic of moving Emily's unfinished hay shed. Good idea, David agreed. But I'm busy rolling stubble for the next few days. If the forecast of hot weather turns out to be accurate, I'm happy to look into it after that. What's rolling stubble? Jake asked. After harvest, we roll the stubble flat so it breaks down quicker for the next season. Just like putting down a layer of mulch in a garden, really. We used to heap it up and burn it, but it's all about putting it back into the soil now. But you need the weather to be hot enough for the stalks to snap and stay lying on the ground. Otherwise, they just spring back up and you've just wasted your time and fuel. Can I go with you and watch? Jake asked. Sure. Though it's not very exciting, it's just going round and round on a tractor. Well, since I've never done that, it might be quite interesting to a city boy like me. In that case, you're on. I'm working at Emily's tomorrow, so I'll drop in and pick you up on the way past. Depending on how quickly it heats up, it probably won't be until around lunchtime. You'll want to pack a sandwich and a water bottle, in case you don't get bored after the first 2 laps, David added with a laugh. I won't stop until evening when it comes in cooler. Cool, I'm going to play farmer for a day, Jake said. Mate, I wouldn't get too excited, David said. Tractor driving can be as boring as batshit. While David and Jake discussed the various tractor driving jobs involved in life on the land, Emily and Barbara quietly swapped the latest gossip they'd heard in town. It turned out they'd both been in that day without the other knowing. Barbara seemed a little quieter than usual, and looking harder at her friend, Emily thought she also looked a little pale. Hopefully she wasn't coming down with something. Though, didn't they say people often got sick when they slowed down after a busy time? David and Barbara had just had David's father's death and funeral and a house full of guests to deal with. With Jake off with David, tomorrow would be a perfect opportunity for the two of them to spend some quiet time together. If it was going to be hot, they wouldn't want to be out and about. It was better to hibernate in that sort of weather. "Hey, Barb," Emily said suddenly, "do you fancy hanging out tomorrow and watching a DVD or two while the boys are off?" "Sounds very indulgent. Probably just what we both need after the last few months. I've got a couple of recent chick flicks." "Perfect." The only DVDs she had were action movies of John's. "Well, how do you like that? We menfolk will be hard at work and you'll be inside with your feet up," David teased. "We'll be sure to pine for you. Will that help ease your burden?" Barbara replied, batting her eyelashes. "It certainly will." Finally, their pizza arrived with an apology for the delay. They oohed and ahed over it and set about devouring the meal with little conversation. Afterwards, the men went up to the counter to settle the bill, and then the four of them made their way outside. They spent a few moments admiring the bright orange and pink sunset before hugging and getting into their separate cars. "Well, that was nice. Thank you," Emily said as they drove out of the car park. "You're welcome. But I guess it means we still haven't officially had our first date. I don't think a double date counts," Jake added with a laugh. "I don't mind. It wasn't like you knew they'd be here." "No, but I still owe you one." "You saved me from my mother, remember? I think we can call it square." She smiled at him. "I saved myself from your mother," Jake said. "Hey, did you notice how cagey they got when you asked why they were there?" Emily asked, deliberately changing the subject. "I did. Something's up that they clearly don't want to share." "I hope they're okay," Emily said. "Well, they seemed happy with each other. More affectionate than usual, I reckon. If we're meant to know, we'll find out," Jake added, patting Emily's thigh. "Just leave it be." "Yeah, you're right. It's just that after all they've done for me, I'd like to return the favour if I can." "You'll get your chance, if and when you're meant to." "I hope so." Emily leaned back into the seat and tried to put the nag of concern out of her mind. "I'm excited about going out with David tomorrow," Jake said, after a few minutes of silence. Emily smiled at his boyish enthusiasm. He sounded like a kid about to enter a candy shop. "That's great, you'll have fun," she said, beaming at him. "But make sure you don't overdo it. You're here to recuperate, remember?" They entered the house to find the red light on the answering machine blinking in the dark kitchen. Emily turned on the overhead fluoro light, dumped her handbag beside Grace, who was snoozing in her bed, and pressed the button to play new messages. "Oh, Des, it's the damned answering machine!" Enid's voice rang out. "Emily, it's your mother here. We're outside. Where are you? I told you we would be stopping in. We've been sitting here in the car for 10 minutes. Call me back when you get this." "Unbelievable," Jake muttered. Emily shook her head slowly and sighed. Just hearing her mother's voice made her feel very tired. Thankfully, it was almost too late to phone back. Well, that would be her excuse. Enid didn't take calls after 9 p.m. "Actually, no, I'll get it over with now," she thought, grabbing the phone and plastering a smile on her face as she'd once been taught in an office skills course. A smile makes for a friendly-sounding voice, she'd learnt during training. Enid picked up straight away. "Enid Oliphant speaking?" "Hi, Mum, we've just got home and got your message." "Where were you?" "I told you we were going out. It's not my fault you chose not to listen." "Oh, Emily, don't get all high and mighty with me." "Was there something you wanted?" "Yes, actually. We'd like to meet this young man you have staying." "It's Jake, Mum, and you've already met him? At dinner with Liz?" "Well,
As it now seems he's your boyfriend, we'd like to meet him properly. I need to have you both for dinner, but all my evenings are booked for the next 2 weeks.
That's all right, we've got a lot on too.
What could you possibly have on? You're a lady of leisure and Jake's on holidays, isn't he?
Sort of. Mum, you don't need to go to the bother of dinner. We'll just drop in for a cuppa soon, okay?
Well then, please give some warning so I'm definitely here. Emily smiled wryly and shook her head slowly. As if you won't be there. She was starting to see the funny side of Enid. As she hung up and deleted the message, she wondered why her mother hadn't just called her mobile in the first place. Why bother leaving an answering machine message Emily might not get for hours? Maybe Enid thought she and Jake had been hiding inside. Chapter 4. At 11 the next morning, David's ute pulled up outside. They went out, Jake swinging John's blue lunchbox-sized esky and a small matching water bottle filled with ice cubes that rattled when he walked. Emily stopped short of the gate at the end of the concrete path and wrapped her arms around him.
Are you sure you're up to heading out?
I'm tired, but I'm fine. I promise I'll call you to come and get me if I'm not up to it.
Okay. I don't mean to nag, I'm just concerned. And you don't seem to be taking it easy at all.
I am. Just changing environments is a huge help, I think. And not having to make business decisions. I'll check in tomorrow, but I'm sure all is well in Melbourne.
Well, okay, if you're sure. Take care,
she said, stretching up and nuzzling his neck. See ya, Jake said, giving her a final firm kiss. He walked around to the passenger's side of the ute, where Barbara was stepping out. Emily returned his wave as the ute drove away, and Barbara leaned into her embrace.
I come bearing chick flicks, microwave popcorn, and soft drink,
Barbara said, holding up a green eco shopping bag. Her friend didn't look nearly as bright and cheery as she sounded, but Emily shook her doubts aside. Jake was right. If something was up, Barbara would tell her if and when she wanted to.
It's going to be a hot one, so let's get inside and batten down the hatches, she said, leading the way back up the path. Thanks to the thick stone walls and their layer of concrete render, the house usually managed to stay cool through 3 days of full-on South Australian heat if kept closed up. 2 more days and it would start to get stuffy. Emily idly wondered what it would cost to put in ducted air conditioning. She'd probably be able to afford it. But was it a luxury that should wait or be done at all? In her 3.5 years with John, she could only remember a handful of nights when they had been unable to sleep due to the heat. Winter wasn't too bad either. They'd tended to shut off most of the house and just live in the kitchen, bedroom and lounge, all of which were clustered at one end of the house and could be heated with small electric heaters. The lounge had an open fire, which she would have liked to use more, except her husband had refused to cut wood himself or get any delivered. "Coffee?" Emily asked, as Barbara sat heavily onto a chair in the darkened kitchen. "Actually, I'd prefer a tea. I seem to have suddenly gone off coffee," Barbara said. "You okay? You look a little pale." "Just a bit queasy. Must have picked up a virus or something. If I could just throw up, I'm sure I'd feel better." "God, you poor thing. You should have cancelled." "It comes and goes." "Well, I'm sure a nice cup of tea will help." "Thanks. Yes," Barbara said. But suddenly she was leaping up with a hand to her mouth and disappearing from the room. Emily had just consulted her watch and decided to give Barbara 1 more minute when she returned looking even paler. "False alarm," Barbara said. It was clear she was trying to sound bright. "Have you seen a doctor?" Emily asked. She frowned as Barbara sat down, nodding. "I've booked, but of course I couldn't get in until next week," she said, rolling her eyes. "Well, you could always go to emergency at the hospital." "I'm not that bad, and I am feeling a bit better." "If you need me to do anything, you only have to ask." "Thanks, I know." Emily was stirring sugar into Barbara's tea when it finally dawned on her. Tell me to back off, but would you by any chance be pregnant?" Barbara looked up sharply.
She was on the verge of tears. "What is it?" Emily asked. "Yes, I'm pregnant," she said. Gosh. Emily wasn't sure how she felt, other than stunned and, if she was completely honest, a little nervous at the prospect of losing her best friend to a baby. God, could I possibly be a worse friend? After everything Barbara's done for me. There had been so much upheaval in recent months. She really just wanted things to be settled for a while, not change. But she put her concerns aside with the stern reminder, it's not about me. "So what's wrong? Isn't this a good thing? You guys want kids, don't you?" She placed the 2 mugs on the table and sat down on the end around the corner from Barbara. Barbara nodded. "I'm just so scared," she said, and began sobbing. "I'm a mess." "Is it the hormones?" "No, I wish." "Is there a problem with the baby?" Barbara fiddled with the handle on the mug and then, without looking up, said, "I've had 2 miscarriages in the year since we've been married. I'm so scared of going through it again. But not enough to stop trying," she added with a wan smile. "Oh, Barbara, I'm so sorry." Emily put her arm around her friend's shoulder again, this time loosely. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to be positive, put it all behind me, us." "Well, let's hope it will be 3rd time lucky," Emily said softly, giving her a gentle squeeze. So, how far along are you? When does morning sickness set in?" "I'm only a couple of weeks. It should be too early for morning sickness. I think my problem is the stress and anxiety." She took a tentative sip of her tea and then sat with her hands wrapped around it for a few moments. Emily waited her out. Barbara finally looked up. Her forehead was creased with concern. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you, but we didn't want anyone to know until 3 months was up and we were in the safe period. Although that's a bit of a misnomer. I lost Isabella at 4 months. She was the second one. They were both before I knew you." "I'm so sorry," she said, hugging Barbara again. "The doctors haven't been able to find anything wrong," Barbara said with a shrug, answering the question on the tip of Emily's tongue. "Just bad luck, not meant to be and all that," she said with a resigned shrug of her shoulders. "God, I feel so helpless," Emily said. "I can't even begin to imagine how you must be feeling." She wondered why Isabella had a name but not the first baby, but she wasn't about to ask. "We're just trying to be as normal as possible and try not to jinx things. We know you guys didn't buy our non-drinking story last night," she said, smiling weakly. "We discussed it on the way home. David's going to tell Jake today too." "Well, you tell us if there's anything we can do for you, both of you. No matter what it is, or what time of the day or night, promise me you'll call if there's anything at all, big or small," Emily said. "I promise." "Thanks, Em. That means a lot." "God, Barbara, after all you guys have done for me." They hugged briefly. "Now, should we start our totally indulgent and lazy day while the menfolk are out toiling the fields?" Barbara asked. "Yes, and let's pop the corn. It can be lunch," Emily declared. "I was hoping you'd say that," Barbara said, grinning. "I seem to be craving popcorn at the moment."
This is the end of CD 1. The book continues on CD 2. CD 2.
Halfway through the movie,
The new Julia Roberts, Emily's phone began to ring. Barbara paused the DVD as Emily picked it up from the coffee table.
"Sorry, I'd better get this," she said, looking at the screen. "It's Simone, Jake's sister," she added, and answered, "Hi, Simone." "Hi, Em. How is everything?" "I'm good, but what you really mean is how's Jake, right?"
Simone laughed.
"Yes, I guess I do. He's doing well, a lot more relaxed than he was in Melbourne. And he told me about his suspected adrenal fatigue. Right now, he's out with my friend David on the tractor. I'm a little concerned he's overdoing it, but he's assured me he will take care. Perhaps the fresh air and change of scenery is the answer,"
Emily added.
"I hope you're right," Simone said. "Oh, well, he's a big boy, he's seen a doctor, so we can only really be here for him." "And how are things with you?" Emily asked. "Great. Your lovely comments about my paintings have got me all inspired. I'm painting like a demon every chance I get." "That's great! I can't wait to see more of your work." "So are you making any more jam?" Simone asked. "It's just that Billy emailed me, and to be honest, Simone, I haven't had much chance to think about it. And it's really a bad time for fruit at the moment. Everything is finished. I should have access to figs in a few months and then oranges over winter for marmalade. I was going to see if the blackberries are still running rampant at the back of the farm, but I haven't had a chance to get up there. I'm really sorry." "Don't be. You can't help when fruit is ripe," Simone said with a laugh. "And anyway, you've probably got your hands full looking after Jake. It's not a problem. Billy just wanted to know for certain where it all stood. Look, I'd better go. I just wanted to know Jake was okay. I'll give him a call." "It was lovely to speak to you, Simone. Thanks for calling." Emily hung up. Simone was checking up on her brother. Isn't that nice? Barbara agreed. "So, shall we continue?" she asked, nodding at the television. "Yes, sorry about that." They resumed watching the movie, but Emily was unable to totally immerse herself back into the story again. She was distracted by thoughts of Simone and her art, and a nagging within her that she couldn't quite grasp. Emily didn't know much about painting, but she liked Simone's bold style of having a single brightly coloured bloom take up most of the space on her huge canvases. If not for the slightly raised, thick paint, some of them might have been mistaken for photographs. The gorgeous texture made you want to reach out and touch them. And she wasn't the only one who appreciated her talent. Jake had a couple of her paintings hanging in his apartment as well. Emily had particularly loved the one of red and green chilies on a bush in his kitchen. If only she knew someone who could get her art out to a wider audience. She wished she could somehow return the help Simone had given her with selling her jam when she was so desperate financially. Not that Simone had known just how desperate her situation was. All she'd known was that Jake had brought back the apricot jam to Melbourne because he liked it and thought it might sell well at the markets. And it had, thanks to the gorgeous labels Simone had designed and the scones she'd taken the trouble to make and serve with it, all without even having met her. If Emily hadn't suddenly inherited everything from John, jam making could well have become her lifeline. She felt the overwhelming need to do something in return. Frustration grew inside of her, so much so that she became physically restless. Grace eventually got up from the couch with a harumph and went to lie down on the floor. "Are you okay?" Barbara asked. "Yeah, sorry." She tried to tell herself that the chance to help would arise when and in whatever way it was meant to. She just had to be patient. Jake was bound to have an idea, or at least a sensible pep talk. Meanwhile, she was missing the movie. Just as they finished the second DVD, they heard 2 toots of a car horn, the signal that David was back. After gathering Barbara's things together, they headed out. Sure enough, David's ute was outside and Jake was walking towards the path. When Emily opened the door, a blast of hot air hit her with the intensity and dryness of an oven. "Bloody hell," she said. She checked her watch and was surprised to find it was almost 6 o'clock. "Quick, get into the cool ute," Emily urged, giving her friend a quick goodbye hug. "See you or speak to you soon." "Thanks, it's been a fun day," Barbara called,
hurrying down the path. "Sorry, too hot to stop," she said to Jake, pecking him on the cheek on the way past.
"God, it's hot,"
Jake said, leading Emily back into the house. "You look shattered. Jake, you're meant to be taking it easy."
"I was in an air-conditioned cab. The hum of the tractor is actually quite soothing when you're not in charge of anything. I had a few power naps along the way. But yes, I am feeling quite done in. Oh, and I got my test results. It took some effort to convince them to give them to me over the phone."
"And?"
"Positive. It's official, I have adrenal fatigue. But at least I don't need to look any further into what's wrong with me. And I know I'll get better. The results weren't as bad as my GP had feared. She told me to just carry on with what I'm doing, and in time I'll be my old, energetic, chipper self again."
"If you take it easy and don't overdo it," Emily warned.
"I love that you're worrying about me, but I'm fine, honey, honestly," he said, kissing her.
"Did, David tell you their news?" A huge smile burst across Jake's face.
"He did. Isn't it exciting?"
Barbara seems more scared than excited. I'm a bit worried about her."
David seems genuinely thrilled, though he's quite concerned about Barbara too. I can only imagine what they must be feeling. I guess all we can do is hope everything will be okay and be there for them if not.
"I guess."
Cross that bridge if and when we get to it, as her gran would have said.
Emily was in the kitchen when Jake came in after his shower with a towel around his waist. She smiled at his wet, mussed, boyish hair sticking out in all angles. As he moved towards her, she noticed the water droplets glistening on his smooth chest. He leaned down, nuzzled her ear, and then started nibbling at her earlobe. Her stomach turned molten and her knees went weak.
"Fancy taking advantage of my evening burst of energy," he whispered.
Emily stood on quivering legs, accepted Jake's outstretched hand, and allowed herself to be led to the bedroom. Chapter 5. Each day flowed into the next, and soon more than 2 weeks had passed since Jake's arrival. Emily loved him being there, but was constantly concerned he was doing too much. But she had to trust that he knew his body and was listening to its needs. She didn't want to become a nag. She was damned lucky to have him in her life and didn't want to put that in jeopardy. They had settled into an easy existence where they spent plenty of time together, but also plenty of time apart as Jake went off with David playing farmer and she did the housework. He was happy. She was happy. Most importantly, they were happy. When they were both home, they often made love in the late afternoon or early evening. Afterwards, Emily would stay with Jake for part of his hour or so of resting. She felt so blessed to have this time together. It was so decadent. But she always left him alone after a while, and always when he disappeared into the lounge to lie quietly on the couch, accompanied by Grace. A few times she had caught herself watching him sleep, looking for signs he was doing better. Really, other than a slightly drawn, pale look about him, most people wouldn't have known there was anything wrong. But Emily was beside him when the night sweat soaked the sheets. She saw the shake in his hands and the confusion and vagueness in his eyes, and knew it wasn't the real Jake. He was making an effort, but he was certainly not the vibrant, cheery fellow who had visited her those first 2 times. When they were with other people, he was more exuberant than when he was at home with her. She could see it took a lot of effort for him to be sociable. They went out to lunch with Sarah and Nathan and David and Barbara one Sunday and had a wonderful time. On the way home, they'd agreed that Nathan and Sarah had looked a lot closer than mere flatmates. A few days later at the bank, when Emily had signed up for an at-call investment account, Nathan had admitted they were officially an item. She was glad to see her friend happy. He had promised to invite them to a dinner party at his and Sarah's house. But a week or so on, nothing had eventuated. Emily wasn't surprised. Sarah and Nathan worked full-time, so they only had the evenings and weekends together. Besides, they were in the flush of young love, just like she and Jake were. They'd get around to it eventually. Meanwhile, she was so grateful for this time with Jake. The heat of the South Australian summer kept them close to home, and more than once they had spent the whole day in bed. It was a charmed, wonderful existence. But she was starting to yearn for something more constructive to do with her time when Jake wasn't around. She'd imagined he would need more taking care of, but he seemed to be doing fine. It was just a long, slow process of getting the body better. He was spending a lot of time with David learning how a working farm operated, and also taking plenty of gentle strolls with his camera, often over to the old cottage ruins. The idea that she really wanted to somehow help Simone bubbled away in the far depths of Emily's brain, but a tangible solution still hadn't presented itself. She was also more and more feeling the need to do something with her life. It was nice to have the means to while away her days, and she was very grateful, but it just wasn't in her nature to be idle for long. One morning, Emily was staring out the bedroom window, wondering what to do. Jake was out with David again, and she was at a loose end. She was standing next to the tall boy beside Gran's button jar, where she often stood and contemplated life. She knew it was ridiculous, but she always felt better when the object was nearby, and answers quite often came to her while she was standing there. She liked to think Gran was still with her while she was close to her treasured object. Emily frowned. She really wished she could move the damned hayshed herself. It was such a blight on the landscape. David and Jake had discussed it, but David was still busy rolling stubble. Grace nudged her leg and she bent down to pat her briefly, before returning her attention to the jar in front of her and her musings. "What I need is some purpose, a project," Emily said aloud, and then looked up at the ceiling. Suddenly she laughed at herself. What the hell was she expecting? A bolt of lightning and Gran's booming voice telling her to take up knitting or something? Nothing happened except that she felt a sharp, enduring stab of shame deep within her. Granny and Grandpa had been through so much, so many tough times over the years, and here she was complaining because she had plenty of money and too much time on her hands. "Come on, Gracie," Emily called, and left the room. The guilt stayed with her as she made her way through the house to what had been John's office and was now also home to Jake's suitcase and laptop. Gran had filled any spare time she had with working for the community. Barbara had asked Emily to join CWA, and, as much as she'd enjoyed more time with her, she'd resisted. She couldn't knit, crochet, or arrange flowers. Therefore, she argued she was absolutely not CWA material, though she'd always be happy to lend a hand with baking for fundraisers. Perhaps driving for Meals on Wheels might be the way to go. As a child during school holidays, she'd loved walking up to the door with the tray of food while Gran sat in the idling car nearby. But Gran had lived in town. Emily was a little too far out. She'd have to think about it. Or was it time to have a child? As the thought crossed her mind, she was disappointed at how practical, how rational it sounded. Where was the ticking biological clock, that desperate need she'd heard other women talk about? She shook her head. The time wasn't right. It was definitely too soon for her and Jake, and really, she needed more distance from all that had gone on in her life recently. While it often felt like years had passed since she'd left John and he'd had a car accident and died, the reality was that it was all very recent. Emily found herself wondering if Gran had felt time passing quickly or excruciatingly slowly while she lived with Alzheimer's and was up in the hostel on the hill. The poor old dear had really just been marking time for a number of years. Which is exactly what you are doing right now. The words in her head sounded uncannily like Gran's. Emily sat down at what had been John's desk in the spare room. Jake's laptop sat closed beside the monitor connected to her tower-style PC. The rest of the large desk was covered in paperwork. There were carefully arranged piles of bills and receipts to be filed, sheets of correspondence from the lawyers regarding the estate, bank statements, and a stack of assorted miscellaneous items she wasn't sure how to file. She considered getting it all into the empty filing cabinets and out of sight, but she couldn't muster any enthusiasm. She was feeling restless to do something, but admin was the last thing she felt like doing. She walked through to the adjoining room. It was empty except for a plain double ensemble bed covered in an old-fashioned powder blue candlewick bedspread. With its rose-patterned wall-to-wall carpet that was around 1940s or 50s vintage, it was a more feminine room than the office, which had carpet in an autumn leaf design. Oranges, browns, and dark pinks on a plain, pale grey background. Grace trotted in and began snuffling her way around the room. John never used to come in here because it was the room his grandfather had passed away in. Emily didn't have a problem with it. If his grandfather was haunting the place, she figured he wouldn't confine himself solely to this room and would have surely shown signs of his presence before now. Not that she knew anything about ghosts and how they operated. Occasionally, relatives of John's had stayed here over the years, apparently without complaint. Now, as Emily sat staring around her looking for inspiration, she wondered if her life with John might have been better if she'd had a room of her own to indulge in some hobbies. Why hadn't she pushed harder to get her own computer? Well, that one was obvious. John would have said it was hardly worth the expense when she'd probably only need it for the odd hour here and there. And how could she have argued with that sort of logic? Emily closed her eyes and tried to conjure up her perfect office space, not that she really needed an office. Though now there was no one to tell her so, she liked the idea more and more. And anyway, she was running a business now, wasn't she? The farm was hers. Well, it would be when the probate came through and the estate was officially finalised. God, the thought of all it entailed made her head fuzzy. She and David had signed the agreement for the sheep, and he'd promised to take her over the farm and give her a bit of a rundown on it all when he got the chance. Meanwhile, Emily was a little embarrassed to admit that she quite liked remaining blissfully ignorant. Staring at the beige walls around her, she suddenly burned with inspiration and the desire to act now. If she could choose any colour she liked, what would it be? She looked down. The carpet was a multitude of pinks, purples, and a few greens depicting foliage on a beige background. There was a great choice of colours right there in front of her, and not so many as to be overwhelming. She felt herself drawn to the pinker tones. But if she chose one, how was she then to get it translated into a paint colour? She couldn't exactly cut out a chunk of carpet and have it matched. But I could go and get a heap of sample pots. That would be fun. She stared at the floor for a few moments, trying to commit the colour to memory. Emily didn't think she'd take the carpet up, even if she wasn't in such a hurry to put her own stamp on the room. It was really quite lovely. She would give it a decent vacuum and the walls and woodwork a decent wipe down before painting, and perhaps even get the visiting carpet cleaning guy in next time he was in town. But for now, she was off to the hardware shop to get some paint. She practically skipped out of the room in her excitement. A few days ago, Jake had said he wouldn't mind checking out the shops selling antiques and bric-a-brac scattered about the district. It would be nice to go looking for something in particular rather than just browsing aimlessly. Maybe Barbara and David could come along too. It would be great to have Barbara's opinion, and then Jake and David could chat together while she and Barbara shopped guilt-free. She almost pulled the car over to get out her mobile phone. No, she'd discuss it with Jake first. For all she knew, he was planning to visit Whyalla and check on the project he was involved with up there. He had mentioned the need to get back up there in the next few weeks. Emily had been a little concerned that he was getting into work again too soon, but he'd reassured her that he was okay and taking careful note of any signs his progress might be slipping. And how could she say otherwise when his face lit up a little at the mere mention of a project or a client? He was so kidding himself if he thought he could take 3 to 6 months off work. A slight sadness descended on her, but she pushed it aside. He had made no mention of going back to Melbourne. Chapter 6. Emily was standing in the doorway surveying her work when she heard the glass sliding door open and close. "Em! Sweetie, are you here?" "Up in the spare room," she called, whilst continuing to stare at the fresh paint job. "It's very pink." she thought. Should I have perhaps just done a feature wall? It was what Doris at the hardware store had assumed she was doing. Emily was now wondering if her comment had in fact been a hint that doing a whole room in that colour would be too much. Perhaps if she did the skirtings and door and window frames in white, it would look better. But she couldn't help feeling that it would be sacrilegious to cover up the lovely grain of the timber. Weren't people falling over themselves to strip back the woodwork of old houses these days? "Wow! Haven't you been busy?" Jake said, appearing behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist and laying his head on her shoulder. "Great colour." "Do you think so? Honestly? I'm beginning to wonder if it's too much." "No way. I love it. I think when you get some more furniture in here, it'll make all the difference. You just need time to get used to it. And if you don't, we can paint over it again. So what is it to be? Spare room or what?" "Office / whatever else I decide it is." "I hope this isn't a sign I'm outstaying my welcome," Jake said, suddenly serious. "Why would you say that?" "Well, you already have a perfectly adequate office next door." "No, this is about me putting my stamp on the house. I love having all this time on my hands, but I think it's sending me a little nuts. I just got a sudden urge. If I wanted that room, I would have asked you to move in here." She put her arms around him. "Honestly, I love having you here." "And I don't want you to ever leave," she added silently. "So you really don't think it's too much?" Emily asked when they parted. "Not at all, but you will need to be careful about what window covering you end up using, to make sure the room isn't too busy. What great carpet," he added, peeling the drop cloth back a bit and staring at the floor. "I was thinking of leaving the bed and just adding a desk and chair and maybe an arm or wing chair and lamp. But it'll all depend on what's out there and how much everything is. I don't want to spend a fortune." "Well, I reckon Simone would match the covering on the chair to the curtains and put a matching cushion on the bed to tie it in," Jake said thoughtfully. Emily agreed absently, while still taking in the new colour. The longer she looked at it, the more she liked it. And she was also starting to see where pieces of furniture could go. It was actually quite exciting. Looking back down at the carpet, she noticed that there was quite a bit of black in the design. By bringing out the deep pink of the roses, she seemed to have also inadvertently highlighted their subtle black edging. It was interesting how colour worked. Perhaps black and white check would work for the curtains and upholstery. Emily brought a finger to her lips and tapped while she thought. Suddenly, a bubble of inspiration burst in her head. She opened her mouth to share, but Jake, who had been silently taking in their surroundings, spoke at exactly the same moment. "I think a mossy green check might work well for the upholstery and curtains. And you could do a matching Roman blind for extra insulation if it's needed." Jake was now squatting on the carpet and tapping a finger on it. "See, there's quite a bit of green in here." Emily laughed. "I just had the same thought. Why try to be clever when someone else has already done the colour matching for me?" she said. "Exactly. And it really is lovely carpet. I bet it cost a fortune in its day," Jake added. "It's pretty feminine," Emily said. "Nothing wrong with that. I happen to like feminine," he said, standing upright and drawing her into another hug and nuzzling her neck. "I need a shower. Care to save some water with me?" "Well, I've probably got some paint splotches I need help removing." She grinned. Later they lay stretched out naked in bed. They had made love and snuggled and finally become too warm. "So how is your day playing farmer again?" Emily asked, rolling onto her side to look at Jake. His face lit up. "Great! Today I got to see a boom sprayer in action. I wish they didn't have to use chemicals, but it seems there's no getting around it. I thought it was lovely and green considering it's the middle of summer, but David tells me the summer weeds are a big problem. It's hard to follow sometimes. I thought farmers always wanted rain.
But apparently the last lot they had has now caused problems. Beats me.
Emily fleetingly thought about how lax John had been with chemical safety. He'd never even worn gloves for measuring out chemicals. I hope you wore safety gear.
Yeah, David's a stickler in that department. You hear about farmers taking risks and not being careful, but we were covered from head to toe.
So you're off with him again tomorrow?
Yep, if that's okay with you. Just a couple more hours rolling up at his place. So I'll need the car unless you need to go anywhere.
No, that's fine. But as long as you're not overdoing it. Emily hated being a nag, but she was concerned about him.
I'm feeling good. Even better now,
he said, grinning cheekily at her. He reached an arm across and traced a finger the length of Emily's bare belly, causing her to shudder with pleasure again. Emily woke the next day feeling very excited. She and Barbara were heading to Port Lincoln for a girls' day out, an all-day shopping trip. Since meeting, they'd idly discussed it a number of times, but Emily had never fully committed. It wasn't that she hadn't wanted to go, but she had always figured that being unable to actually spend money on anything but the barest of bare essentials would make for a depressing day. And window shopping wasn't her idea of fun. What could be worse than seeing all those beautifully displayed windows, shop floors, and advertisements when one couldn't afford to indulge? What if she lost her willpower for a moment and whipped out her credit card as if it wasn't real money leaving her account? So Emily had decided it was best to avoid the temptation altogether. Today would be an entirely different story, though she would still have to keep herself in firm check. Having been so tightly restrained for so long, whilst married to John and then so cash-strapped for the past few months, a stray purchase was bound to signal something in her brain akin to opening the floodgates. Luckily, Barbara wasn't a frivolous shopper, so she would help keep her on the straight and narrow. For a fleeting moment, Emily wondered if Barbara would want to spend the day trawling baby shops. It was still very early days, but it might be nice to pick up a little present for the baby. Would that make her clucky? Oh well, she'd just have to wait and see. Jake was still asleep, so she carefully got out of bed, stepped around Grace in her position on the floor, dragged her bathrobe from the hook on the back of the door, and made her way through to the bathroom to shower. A few minutes later, Jake wandered in while she was rinsing her hair and humming to herself.
Someone's chirpy this morning,
he said, opening the sliding shower screen to give her a quick peck.
Nothing like the lure of the big smoke full of bright, shiny objects, huh?
Yep, can't wait.
I can tell. So do we need a big breakfast? You know what they say about not shopping on an empty stomach.
No, thanks. And I think that only applies to food shopping. We're going to start with cake and coffee when we get there. Not ideal nutrition, but hey, Emily said, turning off the shower and then stepping out into the towel Jake held out for her. So what are you up to today? More playing farmer with David?
Something like that.
Emily caught an odd sort of look cross his face ever so briefly, almost like caginess. Perhaps it was slight embarrassment at her gentle ribbing, but it wasn't like he'd complained before.
I'll have you know, Jake continued, full of mock seriousness, the fact that I can now competently operate a tractor and boom sprayer means I've risen above the ranks of mere playing.
Does that mean you're looking for a career change, dear? She asked.
Becoming a farmer? Hell no. God, far too many things can go wrong that you have no control over. Though I have to admit I am quite enjoying being David's lackey. All care and no responsibility. It's kind of nice for a change. But all good things must come to an end.
Surely you're not thinking of heading back to your business already. I didn't think you'd last 6 months, but it's only been a couple of weeks. Are you sure it's wise? You seem fine, but what if... Jake placed his hands on each side of her face and looked deeply into her eyes.
Don't worry, Petal. I'm not getting fully back into work mode, and I'm not thinking of leaving you to head back to Melbourne.
Emily coloured slightly. Oh, I'm not worried about me.
It's okay. I only meant I need to get back in touch with things a bit. starting with going up to Whyalla to check on the Civic Centre project. Actually, I've been considering setting up an agency over here. There doesn't seem to be anyone else doing old buildings, especially in stone. And with that, he walked out, leaving Emily with a head full of questions. An agency? Here in Wattle Creek? Was he just winding her up? She stood there dripping onto the bath mat for a few moments until her brain kicked back into gear and she remembered she didn't have long to get herself ready. As she started the hairdryer, she told herself not to worry. Jake wasn't one to drop a bombshell like that and walk away unless he was just joking. One thing was true, though. As far as she knew, there wasn't anyone on the whole of the Eyre Peninsula who specialised in building with stone. That was no doubt why the new cellar doors popping up about the place were constructed out of corrugated iron, and why old homesteads were being torn down and replaced with kit homes and transportable buildings. One of the huge problems with living so far away from the big cities was that freight made everything more expensive. The lack of competition didn't help either. As Emily put some sunscreen on her face and added pale pink lipstick, she thought Jake might have just struck upon a good idea. Knowing him, he wouldn't have mentioned it without at least looking part way into it. She wouldn't be surprised to learn that he'd started looking into possibilities after that first trip with Elizabeth, or even that was why he'd visited the area in the first place. She let out a sigh as she told herself to leave the subject alone. She was desperately trying not to be like her mother, who asked questions non-stop and pried and prodded unnecessarily. No, she would be mature and non-controlling and not say a word until Jake brought it up again. And she would certainly not be all needy and demanding to know if he was planning to stay. Just let it be, she told herself. It was a phrase that ran through her head often when spending time with her parents. "You look nice," Jake said, looking up as Emily wandered into the kitchen all ready to go. "Thanks." "Time for a coffee?" he asked, getting up. Emily checked her watch. "Yes, please, but I've only got 10 minutes. As Jake made her coffee, Emily sat down with her list. "Are you sure there isn't anything you want me to get you?" she asked. "Actually, I wouldn't mind a new book to read. Some crime, say from James Patterson, Lee Child, one of the Kellermans, if you go into a bookshop," he said, putting a mug of steaming, milky coffee in front of her. "I really want to get back into reading now I've got the time." "Okie dokie," she said, adding the authors' names to her list. She picked up her cup. Thank you." "I'll get you some money," he said. "No, don't worry about it. We can sort it out later. Or I can take it in kind," she said, leaning towards him and planting her lips on his. "Aren't you becoming quite the little minx?" he said. "I don't want you to go now." Emily enjoyed the effect her kisses had on him. "Okay," he said, running a hand through his hair and drawing a line in the conversational sand. "That's some list you've got there," he said, leaning over. "Uh-huh," Emily said, trying to banish thoughts of Jake's naked body from her mind. "It's mostly stuff I want to check out. Furniture and decorating ideas for the study." She had initially wanted to add curtains, quilt cover, sheets and towels, but had stopped herself. While it would be nice to start afresh, she couldn't go blowing money just for the sake of it. It would be far too easy to leave behind her lifetime of frugality and go crazy. "I'd like to visit a few antiques and bric-a-brac shops, to find some one-off pieces with character. But it won't hurt to check what's available new." Suddenly there was the sound of a friendly toot-toot of a car horn. "Well, that's me," Emily said. She leaned over for what was meant to be a quick peck, but Jake grabbed her around the waist and pulled her onto his lap, and the kiss became more passionate. "God, you're sexy," she growled, shaking her head with frustration as she eased herself out of his clutches. "Jesus, you can't say something like that and then just walk out the door." "Sorry," she said. "Hold that thought until tonight." "Oh, do you want to drive me crazy?" He groaned and put his head in his hands on the table.
The truth was, if Barbara wasn't outside waiting for her, she could imagine them tearing each other's clothes off right there in the kitchen. Emily was a little shocked at the strength of her feelings. She took a deep breath and shook her head.
Bye, Gracie.
She gave the dog a brief pat before retrieving her handbag from the nearby chair. See you later. Have fun, Jake said.
I will. You too,
Emily called, already halfway out the sliding door. She gleefully skipped down the path before leaping into Barbara's car. Ready for a fun day of shopping? Barbara said, after they'd exchanged quick kisses and hugs.
Yes, onward, James,
Emily said, clapping her hands together. As they drove onto the main dirt road, Emily noticed a ute coming towards them. They returned David's wave as he drove past.
What are those two up to anyway? Jake was weirdly vague.
Dunno, you know men, Barbara said with a shrug. Probably just pottering around on the farm, secret men's business and all that. Emily glanced at her friend. Was Barbara trying to avoid saying something?
Well, we've got our own secret women's business going on, she said,
and slapped her hands on her knees a little more forcefully than she had intended. Emily spent the whole day unable to wipe a slightly ridiculous grin off her face. She couldn't help it. It was just so wonderful to be out with her best friend, shopping, and with not a care in the world. After an hour-and-a-half drive, they arrived at the shopping street that ran along the picturesque foreshore of the seaside city. They found a park right outside their chosen cafe and headed in. Without consultation, they both ordered lattes and carrot cake, laughing at their synchronicity.
How totally decadent,
Emily declared, as she pushed her fork into her cake with its luscious cream cheese icing.
Yes, should be more of it,
Barbara agreed. After coffee and cake, they shopped, ate a lovely cafe lunch, and shopped some more, scouring the two main shopping strips for everything on their lists. A number of times they laughed about how exhausting shopping was, usually just as they pushed the door open into another store. Despite wandering the shops all day, Emily only purchased some necessities and 2 books for Jake. She saw plenty of things she liked, especially in the large furniture store. But with big, expensive items like chairs, desks, and curtains, she wanted to take her time and make a careful, informed decision. She did, however, manage to surreptitiously take lots of photos with her mobile phone while Barbara distracted the sales staff. They visited a shop chock full of baby gear, and Emily oohed and ahed over the tiny items of clothing Barbara held up, imagining the little person who might one day wear them. But as they roamed the racks, cooing over booties and singlets and onesies, Emily was a little disappointed to find no stirrings of a maternal nature in herself. It was a pity. How good would it be for 2 best friends to have their kids grow up together? Even better if they had a boy and a girl between them. She shook the thoughts aside as she realized Barbara was leaving the store and hurried to catch up.
You didn't buy anything,
she said.
I thought you were going to get that cute little jumpsuit.
I was, but I got scared. I don't want to jinx things.
It's okay to be scared,
Emily replied, and linked her arm through Barbara's to reassure her.
But you can't have the poor little thing arriving into the world with no clothes to wear, she added, smiling warmly.
I've got plenty of time, she said, clearly trying to sound more exuberant than she felt.
I guess that means we'll have to come back for another shopping trip.
They reluctantly declared the day's shopping over at 5 o'clock, leaving just enough time to have a fortifying hot chocolate before embarking on the long trip home. Weary and all talked out, they both sat silently staring into their mugs for a few moments. Emily found herself again thinking about her life with John. She remembered how he'd encouraged her to give up her job when they got married. At the time, she'd seen it as his way of showing he loved her and his desire to take care of her, fulfilling his duty as husband. Now she could see how naive she'd been. It wasn't anything to do with love. It was all about control. God, she wished she could stop thoughts of John popping up, and of her mother for that matter. Enid was Enid, she wouldn't ever change.
As Jake said, she'd have to learn to live with her and stop bitching about it. Well, he hadn't been quite so forceful. She laid her teaspoon on the saucer and picked up her mug and sipped, concentrating on the hot earthiness and soaking up its comfort. "How much fun is this?" Barbara said. Emily was jolted from her reverie. "Yep, brilliant," Emily replied. "So what's up?" Barbara asked, putting her cup down and looking at Emily. "Nothing. Why do you ask?" "Well, you've been smiles all day and suddenly you look like just tired, I guess," Emily said, and took another sip of hot chocolate. Barbara continued to stare pointedly at her friend with raised, questioning eyebrows, but said nothing. "All right, you win," Emily said with a tight laugh. She fiddled with her teaspoon. "I was just thinking how long it's been since I was able to shop without worrying about every cent. And then about John's reaction when I got home. Which should have you feeling ecstatic, not glum," Barbara declared with bewilderment. "I made such a mistake marrying him and giving up my job," Emily continued wistfully. "Yes, we all know that, but you fixed it. You left the brute, and now he's gone. So come on, you have to let it go. We all make mistakes. It's what you do with what you've learned that's the important thing." Something Gran might have said, though probably not quite so gently. Granny Mayfair could never abide self-pity and wasn't afraid to point it out if she saw it. "And don't you dare mention that crap about being a failure. That's Enid's bag, not yours. Might I remind you again, my dear friend, that this is the 21st century and that you don't need a man in order to be fulfilled. If you want one, fine. And you've got a bloody nice one waiting at home who I know for a fact would do anything to make you happy. So stop feeling sorry for yourself. Finish your drink and let's head on home to our gorgeous menfolk." "Okay, then." As Emily drained her cup, she smiled to herself. Barbara sounded so like Gran sometimes. It was nice, but it also made her feel the teeniest bit sad. "Are you okay to drive, or would you like me to?" she asked, more out of politeness than the desire to drive. She was probably a little too weary, though she could feel the sugar from the hot chocolate starting to kick in. "Thanks, but I'm fine." Emily was pleased to be once again seated in the car and was now realizing how painful her feet were. She'd worn what she thought were comfortable shoes, though the amount of walking and standing around browsing they'd done would have rendered anything dressier than sneakers uncomfortable, she thought wryly. She was seriously out of practice with this shopping caper. Thankfully, she had Jake and his beautiful hands to make her feel all better later. Just as Barbara was fishing the keys out of her handbag, her mobile phone rang. "It's David," she said as she answered. "Hello, darling. How did your day go?" Emily couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but the way Barbara was looking at her, seemingly trying not to, told her something was being said she wasn't meant to hear, and the slight flush to her friend's face confirmed it. "All right. Okay. See you later then." That's one of the shortest conversations I've ever heard between those two, she thought as Barbara ended the call and tossed the phone back into her handbag. Her friend looked decidedly cagey. "That was David," Barbara declared. "So you said. Is everything okay?" "Yep." Barbara put the key in the ignition, which Emily took as a sign their discussion of the phone call was over. She itched to ask more, but reluctantly accepted that if Barbara wanted to tell her something, she would. They backed out of their parking space and joined the slow-moving traffic on the shopping strip. After a few minutes, they were out on the open highway where the traffic was light. The molten orange sun behind them cast deep shadows into the car. Emily leaned back into her seat. The radio played music quietly in the background. She cast her gaze between the windscreen and the side window, while Barbara kept two hands on the wheel and peered past it to the road ahead. Emily tried to keep her eyes open, but with the late afternoon sun coming in over her shoulder and the steady, gentle movement of the car, it was more and more difficult.
She must have nodded off, because suddenly she woke to find Barbara indicating and taking the right-hand turn into the seaside town of Tumby Bay. Golly, she must have been asleep for nearly half an hour. Emily sat up straighter and blinked a couple of times. She felt quite refreshed and not groggy at all, but she frowned slightly. Why are we stopping in at Tumby Bay? Barbara had made no mention of it earlier, and all the shops would be shut. I thought we might have an early dinner, Barbara replied. I hear the hotel on the foreshore has a new chef. Oh, okay, great. I guess. Emily felt like she'd been eating all day, and she was keen to get home to Jake. I should ring Jake and let him know I won't be home for tea, she said, starting to fish about in the handbag at her feet for her phone. No need, that's what David was phoning about. They're probably at the pub as we speak, Barbara added quickly. A little too quickly, Emily thought. So why didn't you say that before? For about the third time that day, she had the feeling there was something going on between her friends she didn't know about. But again, in the interests of being less Enid-like, she refrained from questioning it. Oh, okay then. I won't disturb him, Emily said, letting go of her bag and sitting back. But the feeling that something a little odd was going on refused to fully leave her. So, what were they up to today anyway? Jake was vague when I asked him, Emily ventured. Oh, I don't know, this and that, Barbara said, taking her right hand off the wheel and waving it about a bit before returning it to its position. Farmer stuff. Emily gnawed at the inside of her cheek as she pondered Barbara's response. Barbara, who was David's right hand. Barbara, who had her finger totally on the pulse. Farmer stuff, my ass. They were up to something. God, I hope they're not planning some sort of surprise. I hate surprises. Oh, God, she thought, her blood feeling like it had stopped in her veins. Jake wouldn't. No, he wouldn't. He had said himself that they weren't going to rush things, and by God, mere weeks sure would be rushing things. No way would he be planning to propose so soon. But if not that, what the hell were they up to? Chapter 7. It was well after dark when Barbara dropped her off. As they drove towards Emily's house, the lights shining through the windows from behind curtains and blinds in the distance made her smile. It was so nice to be coming home to a friendly presence. Well, now 2 friendly presences. But gosh, she was exhausted. At that moment she yawned, followed immediately by Barbara. You'd better stop in for a break before the last stretch, Emily said. I'll be okay. Yawning is contagious, you know. Why is that? No idea, but that is too deep a question after the day we've had. As usual, whenever she was turning into her driveway, Emily glanced at the site of the old cottage across the way. It was a habit she was trying to break. Tonight, as the headlights panned around the corner, something seemed a little different. She was probably imagining things, or was too tired and not seeing things correctly. Or perhaps it was just her position in the passenger's seat rather than the driver's that had made things seem different. Barbara stopped at the gate by the house. Jake came out, followed by Grace. He was dressed casually in shorts and a light navy and white striped polo top. His hair was damp and mussed. Whatever he'd got up to that day with David, he must have only been home long enough to shower. Barbara got out to help Emily sort through the bags of shopping in the boot. Hello there. Have we had fun? Jake asked, coming down the concrete path to help carry. I did, but I missed you, Emily said, wrapping her arms around him. That's lovely. I missed you too, he said, and kissed her deeply. She bent down to give Grace a hug. Did you miss me too? The dog wagged her tail so hard the whole length of her wiggled. Looks like you two were busy, Jake said, looking down at the mass of shopping. We were indeed, Barbara and Emily said in unison, and then chuckled. Right, I think that's it, Barbara said, and shut the boot lid with a thud. The women hugged. Thanks so much for a wonderful day, Emily said. Thank you, Barbara said. It was a great day. See you soon. She got back into the car, waved, and called, See you, Jake, as she pulled away. Jake and Emily stood with an arm around each other and watched as Barbara drove off. Grace was sitting patiently beside them. As the car became a hum in the distance, the silence was filled with a multitude of creatures settling into their nighttime symphony. It was a gorgeous, warm summer evening with a slight cool breeze. Jake gave Emily another quick kiss and then bent and gathered up the handles of most of the shopping bags. She picked up the rest. Anything exciting in here? He asked, as they made their way inside. Not really, although I did find you some books. Looking at all the bags they carried between them, it seemed like Emily had bought heaps, but in actual fact she'd only bought a couple of cheap T-shirts and light track pants, some novels for Jake, a couple of beach towels on sale to use as bedding for Grace, and 2 bags of groceries. She and Barbara had picked up favourite items that the local supermarket in Wattle Creek didn't stock. But her most treasured purchases were the latest editions of 4 interior decorating and house and garden magazines. Emily loved flicking through the glossy pages but had rarely ever bought them new. They were such a luxury. So, what did you get up to today? She asked, as she scurried back and forth putting the groceries away in the pantry. Oh, nothing too exciting, just hanging out with David. Have you eaten? I can make you something. Thanks, but I'm fine, he said, reaching over and dragging one of her magazines towards him. Mind if I have a look at this? Not at all, go for it. Emily wasn't sure why, but again she had the feeling that something wasn't quite right. When she flipped up the lid on the rubbish bin, she noticed a soup tin and bread bag. Have you only had toast and soup for dinner? Yeah, just now. We got caught up. But Barbara said you were going to the pub hours ago. What's going on? She kept the words to herself. I can fix you something more substantial if you like. It won't take long to thaw out some steak. No, thanks, I'm fine. But I won't say no to a big breakfast in the morning, he said with a cheeky grin. I know it's early, he said, now up from the table and wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. But I'm sure you're exhausted. How about a massage? Oh, that would be lovely. But after a quick shower, I feel all grimy. Okay, only if I can join you. Haven't you just had one? Emily said, reaching up a hand and ruffling his hair that was still damp. Well, one can never be too clean. The next morning, Emily stirred, rolled over sleepily, and kissed Jake. But instead of wrapping his arms around her and seeing what happened next, Jake leapt out of bed and flung the curtains open. Emily was momentarily disappointed. She'd been hoping for a little entanglement in the sheets. It was Australia Day, but they had decided against going to any of the special breakfasts being held around the district. Emily had thought Jake would definitely be up for a bit of lovemaking. If not, he'd be sleeping in. Instead, he was standing at the window in his tight black trunk undies looking out. It's a lovely morning, he said. Yeah, not meant to be too hot today, Emily said, lying on her back and linking her hands behind her head. It's really quite a spectacular view. I'm sure it is. What's going on? He's seen morning from that window plenty of times now. They're all pretty much the same this time of year. Bright, clear and beautiful, but predictable. Seen one, seen them all. Aren't you getting up? Jake said over his shoulder. Aren't you coming back to bed? Emily tried for seductive, but her voice came out more like a whine. No, come and have a look at this. Why? Because it's beautiful. Beautiful? A pile of rocks and building debris and a giant Meccano set? I'd rather just look at the view from here, she said, staring at Jake's smooth bare back and taut upper thighs. Oh, ha ha, he said, still facing the window. He was beginning to shift on his feet as if getting impatient or needing to pee or something. With a sigh, he finally turned away and got back into bed beside her. They snuggled into each other, became entwined, and started to kiss. But something didn't feel quite right. Jake seemed distracted. She pulled away.
What? What's wrong?
He asked, frowning. That's what I was about to ask you.
Nothing's wrong. Why?
Emily just looked at him with arched eyebrows. He shrugged and stayed silent. What's up with you this morning? You leap out of bed like you're on fire, which has never happened in all the mornings you've been here, and then you stand at the window going on about the view, which you've seen plenty of times, and one we both know isn't worth commenting on thanks to my late husband's intervention. Has a spaceship landed out there overnight, or are you having some kind of episode?
No and no,
Jake said, sighing deeply. Well, what's going on?
Emily, just go and look out the damn window, he said with a groan. Go on, do it for me, please.
He was lying on his back and shaking his head slowly. Why? She eyed him suspiciously.
God, you make some things hard, he said with a laugh. Okay, don't, he said with another, and got out of bed. As he started to gather clothes and get dressed, Emily's heart gripped. Shit, we're not having a fight, are we? Surely not about me not looking out the window. God, that's almost as silly as me last time. Okay, all right, if it means that much to you, I'll look out the damned window. She got out of bed and padded over to the nearest of the 2-bedroom windows, the other one to where Jake had stood. She glanced out. Yes, it was indeed a bright, sunny, glorious summer morning. Cobalt blue sky, a couple of wispy clouds. So bloody what? Yep, I agree. It's lovely, she said brightly, despite still feeling very perplexed. She turned back to Jake, who was putting on socks. Just thought it was a morning worthy of appreciating, that's all, he said with a shrug.
Well, let's get out in it and go for a walk then, shall we? Emily said, opening the first drawer in her tall boy to gather clothes. They laced up their shoes and left the house. Grace bounded ahead but stopped just outside the gate on the rubble driveway area. Emily had trained her that they now went straight ahead, down past the sheds, rather than left out onto the public road that ran through the middle of the farm, which was near where the old cottage had been. Emily's shoes didn't feel quite right, so she stopped at the end of the concrete path and bent down to retie them.
So, which way would you like to go? Left or straight ahead?
Jake asked. It struck Emily as an odd question, since they had only ever gone straight ahead since Jake had been there. Perhaps he was just being polite, making conversation, or perhaps he wanted a change. Too bad. She didn't want to see what was over that way. Straight ahead. Definitely straight ahead, she said, standing up and leading the way. As soon as she saw which way they were headed, Grace raced off ahead. She's growing so fast, Emily thought, as she watched the border collie's flickering tail. She smiled and looked up at Jake as he grasped her hand and linked their fingers together. It was as perfect a morning as it had looked from inside the house. Cool, not a breath of wind, and with the sun shining brightly. The forecast was for it to be warm, and Emily had already decided to spend it inside, going through the photos from yesterday and trawling through her glossy magazines searching for decorating inspiration. She was eager to complete her office. After their shower the night before, they'd both sat up in bed flicking through her new magazines. They'd had fun nudging each other and pointing out things they liked. Eventually, Jake had put down his magazine, shuffled in closer, and they'd gone through the one publication together. Much better. That they so clearly had a shared interest made Emily's heart glow, and they seemed to like a lot of the same things. It certainly boded well for the future. So far so good, her Gran would have said. Emily felt sure Gran would have loved Jake, and it made her a little sad that she wasn't around to see how happy she was with him. As they walked, she kicked a stone and watched it bounce and bobble along the ground in front of her. Their steady footsteps and her occasional kicks were the only sounds other than the usual morning calls of birds. You're very quiet, Jake suddenly said. So deep in thought was Emily that she started slightly. Oh, sorry, just thinking about Gran. Wishing she was here to see me so happy. She would have loved you. And I'm sure I would have loved her too. I get the impression she was quite the character. Emily smiled up at him. As she began to look back down at the stone she'd been kicking, her attention was caught by something behind Jake. She stopped in her tracks as she saw a new steel structure standing beside what had been the last shed. She looked from it to Jake with her mouth open. He smirked back at her. Surprise, he said, opening his arms wide. He now grinned broadly. Wow! Wow! You moved it! Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you! She said, throwing her arms around him. David's the one you need to thank, but I'll always take a hug, he said, wrapping his arms tightly around her and kissing her neck. After a moment, Emily pulled away and got her mobile out of her pocket. It was only 7:30, but hopefully it wasn't too early for David and Barbara. She found their number and pushed the green key to make the call. As she waited for it to be answered, she stared at the steel structure, the excitement building inside her. She was all but jumping up and down on the spot when Barbara picked up. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God! She cried into the phone. Barbara laughed and said, I take it you're talking about the shed? Yes, I'm talking about the shed. Thank you, thank you. I'll put David on. A split second later, David was on the line. Hey, I take it you like your surprise then? He said. Do I ever? I'm just so blown away. Thank you so much. You knew it was going to happen sometime soon. Yes, but it's actually done. Again, thank you. The words seemed inadequate, but what else could she say? It's my pleasure. We'll be over tomorrow to do the iron. The footings need a day to cure. Perfect timing being a public holiday and all. Who's we? Jake and me, Bob Stanley, Steve Olsen, and Grant Anderson. And don't worry, I made sure Jake didn't overdo it. I had him in the tractor operating the loader bucket. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. I'm happy to pay everyone for their time. Just let me know. At that, she looked up to find Jake shaking his head. I can't speak for Jake, but there's no need to pay me or the other guys. Grant and Steve are on annual leave, and Bob owed me a favour. They're all happy to help you out. They thought you got a rough deal with John and wanted to go some way to evening the score. Steve and Grant feel bad about snubbing you that day just after you'd split up from him too. You got a lot of friends around here, Em. Just you remember that. Emily felt her throat suddenly tightening and tears gathering behind her eyes. Thanks, David, she managed with a croak. Can you put Barb back on? Yeah, she wants to speak to you again too. Here she is. I hope to hell you're not crying, Barbara said, causing Emily to laugh. Maybe just a little, she said. Well, I'll leave you to it. See you soon. Okay, see ya. Thanks so much again, both of you. It's our pleasure. See ya. Grace stood beside them with her head cocked to one side, showing obvious concern for her mistress. Emily pulled a crumpled tissue from her sleeve, blew her nose hard, wiped away the couple of tears that had escaped, and took a deep breath. Shall we continue? She said, giving Jake a weak smile. Yes, let's, he said, offering a bent elbow for her to slip her hand through. Grace, sensing all was well again, bounded off ahead of them. Just as they started to pick up speed again, Jake said, Or would you rather go the other way now? No, the rubble is still there. Unless you guys moved that too, she added, sounding hopeful. No, but I've been thinking about that. Yes? And? Why don't we rebuild it? How much would it cost? I remember you saying it would be a pretty big job. Well, it won't be cheap, but the stone is there and I'll happily throw in my labour. You can't do that. Of course I can. You're meant to be taking a break, resting. I'm fine. And maybe a bit of manual labour is just what I need.
As I said, I've been thinking about it anyway. It could be a win for both of us. I could use it as a sample of my work, like an advertisement, and you could have your B&B.
I think I've gone off the B&B idea,
she said, a little apologetically. Well, you could have your cottage for whatever you want to do with it. You could rent it out for extra income, set up a shop or a cafe. The options are pretty endless. She thought about it.
So you were serious the other day when you talked about setting up an agency for your business here?
Emily said. Yeah. It's certainly worth crunching a few numbers. It's a pretty low-risk proposition for me because my main business is so well established. I'm not talking about taking over the world or anything, just the odd project here and there to keep my hand in. The cellar door market might appreciate stone buildings if there was someone local to keep costs down. If I'm going to stick around, I'd like to keep doing something I love, but without the pressure of dealing with big corporations and government departments. So what do you say?
Are you trying to make me cry again?
It's nothing to cry about, he said. Jake stopped walking. He turned to face Emily and grasped her by the shoulders. I love you. I want to be here for the long haul if that's what you want too. I know I said we wouldn't rush things, but I want you to know that I'm serious about us, serious about staying.
But what about Melbourne?
Big city, lots of cars, squealing trams, a strange road rule called a hook turn, he said, grinning at her. What about Melbourne?
You have a thriving business there.
There are plenty of good project managers around. It's a well-run business, but I'm not arrogant enough to think I'm indispensable. And it's not as if I'm totally walking away. I'll keep an eye on things, but from a distance and not so often.
Don't you miss the hustle and bustle of city life?
I don't know. Maybe. But then a trip back now and then would probably be enough.
But what about your gorgeous apartment?
Rent it out, sell it if I need the money. It's only a building, Em, he said with a shrug. Only a building. Different things mean different things to different people, he said, as if sensing her thought. He took her face in his hands. I know how much the cottage means to you, and how much your husband hurt you when he pulled it down. I can make that better for you, and I want to. Please let me. You'll never know how much it meant that you dropped everything to come to Melbourne for me when it was so out of your comfort zone. I'd like to repay the favour. And you'd be doing me another favour by letting me use it as a display, remember?
But what about your adrenal fatigue? You're meant to be taking time off.
I think this will be okay. It'll be a scaled-back version of work. Besides, I'll be bored in a few months if I don't do something. This will all take time to get up and running. I've only just started to think about it.
I'm just concerned you're taking on too much too quickly.
Unless you don't want all this, us, he said suddenly, looking at her. It's just that you're finding a lot of reasons for me not to do this. Emily rushed to reassure him.
It all sounds perfect to me, she said wistfully. As long as you're sure.
She felt all warm and cozy inside. There's still a lot of research to do, planning, decisions to make, figures to go through.
Well, if you're in, I'm in,
she said decisively, with a nod of her head. How good would it be to have her cottage back, an even better version? And what could be more romantic than building a house with the man you loved? Emily felt excited to be embarking on a major project together. There would probably be a considerable financial cost, of course, but this certainly was true love. She was just thinking she couldn't walk. She was so deliriously happy, when Jake grasped her hand and gently pulled her forward. Come on, he said. Let's earn ourselves a big breakfast and a day inside making plans.
Actually, I've got another form of exercise in mind,
Emily replied, leading him back towards the house. Chapter 8. After a big bacon and eggs breakfast, they walked over to the mound of rubble that had once been Emily's dream. Her stomach flip-flopped.
Could they really do it? Again, she found herself wondering about the family that might have lived there over 100 years ago. It didn't matter that she was no relation. The feeling that she wanted, no, needed to do this for them engulfed her. Her heart rate rose. Maybe simply putting up a little weatherboard place would make more sense financially, but it just wouldn't be right. This was absolutely the place for a limestone cottage. Not to mention Emily's desire to right John's wrong. She felt as strongly about that as she did about anything else. As hard as this will be, it will be worth it. If it wasn't meant to be, the universe would have sent a sign. She couldn't wait to get started. She knew it was all a little silly, melodramatic, overly romantic, whatever you wanted to call it, but she just could not shake the feeling. And she had Jake to thank. She looked up at him and smiled warmly and forced her romantic notions aside to focus on what he was saying. I think building just in front would be a good idea. That way we won't have to move everything twice. Emily stared at the rubble pile. In the months since John had knocked it down, the mishmash of bricks, timber, corrugated iron, stone, and other unidentifiable building debris had become overgrown with weeds. As the scale of it struck her, she started to feel a dose of reality seeping in. Jesus, where do we start? First, we'll have to go through it all to sort the rubbish from what is reusable. Jake was getting more animated. He went to the edge of the pile and picked out a few rocks. See? He said, holding up 2 for Emily to examine. We'd need to chip off the old mortar and get the stone clean. It's not hard, just time-consuming. You could do it. I can teach you if you're interested. We could do it together. Emily closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. Ah, bliss. She could imagine them spending whole days working side by side, taking rocks from one pile, chipping away to clean them up, adding them to a new pile, stopping to eat and sip on water, taking the occasional rest together. At the end of each day, they'd walk back to the house exhausted but happy and fulfilled, hopefully not too worn out to make love. The next morning they'd return, hand in hand, and start all over again. Maybe it was a bit pathetic, but it was totally romantic too. Not unlike men in her grandparents' era building their future brides a house as a wedding gift. Oh, Jake, could you be more perfect? Standing there in the partial shade of the large gum trees with the sun gently drumming on her back, Emily literally felt warm and fuzzy right through to her bones. Her negative voice tried to tell her he wasn't actually building her a house. She was paying for it. But her positive voice wasn't having a bar of it. This is going to be great. It won't be easy, but it can be done, Jake added, as he put the rocks back down onto the pile. Emily suddenly had the feeling Jake was losing enthusiasm, perhaps because she was just standing there looking all weird and vacant. If you think it can be done, it can be, she said enthusiastically. And I'm willing to get my hands dirty, she added, linking her arm through his. Wasn't this what she'd dreamt of with John? Back then, she'd hoped they would run the farm shoulder to shoulder, but what did the project matter? What mattered was a mutual goal to work towards. Suddenly, Emily could see how Gran could have given up her posh home life with all its trappings to become the wife of a mere farmer. No disrespect to Grandpa. She had loved her man and had known they could do anything as long as they were together. Their goal had been the farm and raising a family. Emily's was a little different, but she felt sure the feelings were the same. At that moment, she felt on top of the world, like she could achieve whatever she put her mind to. Come on, I want to start making some notes and calculations, Jake said, leading her back towards the main house. Part of her wanted to stay and start sorting through the rocks, but there was no point going at it like a bull at a gate, as Gran would say. As a professional, Jake would want to formulate a sound, workable plan. Slow and steady wins the race. If it was meant to be, it would be.
This is the end of CD 2. The book continues on CD 3. 3.
Back inside, Jake strode up the long enclosed veranda to the room he was using as his office before returning to the kitchen. He dumped his laptop and a few pads of paper, loose sheets, pens, pencils, and erasers on the table. Emily stood by, feeling a little dazed and a lot useless.
"It might help to have your photos of the cottage," Jake suggested.
Emily went to the bedroom and got her folder out from under the bed. The scrapbook of ideas she'd put together for the original cottage, which contained notes, photos, fabric samples and paint charts, and old magazine clippings of furniture, interiors, exteriors, and landscaping ideas. On the way out, she also grabbed her selection of glossy new house magazines, despite knowing it was way too early in the process for interior decorating. She added her contribution to the now cluttered kitchen table.
"You look over all this while I make your coffee," Jake said.
Looking at the rough sketches he had laid out for her, Emily was impressed at how much work Jake had already put into the project. Clearly, he'd been thinking about it for a while. No wonder he'd been spending more and more time up in the office.
"It's more cost-effective to go bigger to start with than having to add on later," Jake explained as he put down their mugs. "I've done what I think will give the most options," he added.
Looks great," Emily said, nodding in agreement. Not knowing what all the little symbols and abbreviations meant, she struggled to follow the plans beyond where the doors, window, fireplaces, and other features were. She turned to a list of projected figures.
"Without knowing exactly how you want to fit out the interior of the cottage, they're pretty rubbery," Jake explained. "And they're just my suggestions. It's your project."
"It's our project." The figures were mainly rounded to the nearest 5,000, and when she looked at the total at the bottom, she was neither shocked nor disappointed. When John's estate was settled, she would have plenty of money to play with. Not that she wanted to be silly about it, that just wasn't in her nature. Emily Oliphant was conservative through and proud of it. The lease on the farm would pay for most of her living expenses for the year, considering there was no rent or mortgage. David had assured her that the troughs, fences and sheds looked pretty good and that she shouldn't be up for any major maintenance bills for the next few years. Though there was always the chance of the unforeseen cropping up, he'd hastened to add. Emily had experienced plenty of unforeseen events in recent times, but she chose to trust that all would be okay. Anyway, if she was smart about the cottage, she could make money from it. She'd have to do something with it, or else in 12 months, or however long it would all take, they hadn't got to that bit yet, she'd have an empty cottage instead of a pile of debris and still be wondering what to do with her life. She was sure she didn't want to run a B&B. After spending ages thinking about it, she'd concluded that she didn't want to cook and clean for other people and have to deal with potential complaints, mucked-up bookings, and non-payers and no-shows. Emily loved to cook. It was a release and a great form of relaxation, but she suspected that that would all change when she had to do it and under pressure. She'd always coped okay with the pressure of feeding the masses during shearing, but that was only for a week or so each year. If the business was successful, which obviously she hoped it would be, she'd be under that sort of pressure every weekend. Maybe she could open a shop. Selling jam was a totally different proposition to running a B&B because she could cook at her leisure. But she wasn't convinced a viable business could be made, despite all Barbara's protestations and encouragement that she could be the next Maggie Beer. It was sweet that her friend believed in her, but there was no getting around the fact that there was no fruit in season during certain times of the year. And even if she planted an orchard, it would be years before the new trees fruited. No, what she needed was something simple where she could make some money without actually making the product herself. Of course, she'd sell jam when she had it. It would be a nice country touch for city visitors travelling through. Emily was startled when Jake spoke.
"Where were you just now?"
"Sorry?"
"You were lost in thought," Jake said.
"I'm just wondering what to do with the cottage when it's done. What does the district need? We've got enough cafes and small restaurants with the new wineries, and I think there are plenty of shops selling furniture and homewares," she said, thinking aloud.
"I'm sure you'll come up with something. You got plenty of time to think about it. Maybe Simone might have an idea," he offered, as he went back to scrutinising his plan and making notes.
Yes, she's bound to have some great ideas,
she mused. And then it came to her. Of course. She'd been thinking about Simone from totally the wrong angle.
"I've got it!"
Jake looked up at her in surprise. "Sorry, what's that?" Emily shook her head and opened her mouth to speak. "I know what I want the cottage to be." But no words came out. She closed her mouth and then opened it again. "Stop it, Emily, you look like a bloody goldfish." "Are you okay? Do you need water or something?" Jake said, starting to get up.
"No, I'm fine,"
she finally said with a laugh, her voice suddenly working again.
"I've just realised what I want the cottage to be. Of course, it's just an idea. I'll have to make sure it can be viable and—"
"Well? Come on, I thought you were having some sort of seizure. Just tell me, what is the cottage going to be?"
"A gallery! To exhibit Simone's paintings and your photos and sell my jam and whatever else I like. It'll be called the Button Jar because what's inside will be an eclectic mix. Obviously, I wouldn't sell buttons, that would be silly."
She chuckled.
"And anyway, there are plenty of places to buy buttons. No one would want to buy buttons from me. But no one's selling good quality art around here, are they? Oh, I can see it so clearly."
Emily was suddenly aware that she was becoming a little out of breath, and Jake hadn't said a word. Well, she hadn't exactly given the poor bloke a chance.
"So what do you think?"
she said almost inaudibly, afraid that saying it all out loud might mean it sounded ridiculous. "Well, I do feel very flattered, but I'm not sure I'm good enough to exhibit," Jake said, blushing slightly. "Simone certainly is, though." Emily was surprised at how shy Jake had become. Staring down at his almost empty plate, he was like a little boy.
"Not good enough to exhibit? Are you mad?"
The shots she'd seen, especially the photos of specific architectural features taken from unusual angles, were incredible. She'd put money on people lining up to buy them. Well, she would be, literally, if she went ahead. She almost giggled, but managed to turn it into a gasp. "And I love the name," he said, deflecting the conversation away from him. "The Button Jar. It's perfect. That would give you leeway to stock whatever you wanted to. Aren't you clever?" he said, leaning over and kissing her.
"And it'll be a tribute to Gran,"
Emily declared, the idea dawning on her.
"It's thanks to her wisdom that I'm here, like this now. I know some of her cliched quotes seem quite silly, even irrelevant, but some are actually quite profound."
"I think it's a lovely idea," Jake said, kissing her again. "And I know she would be very proud of you." While Gran had never directly said, "You should do this or do that," Emily was seeing more and more that the old lady had gradually been setting her up to deal with the hard knocks in life. If only she'd had the courage to leave John when Gran was still alive. Then she'd have known her granddaughter would be okay. But it was the way it was meant to be. Perhaps Gran had known she'd be okay because she'd been carefully and surreptitiously steering her right. Unlike her own mother, shouldn't that have been Enid's job? Emily almost snorted aloud. From the age of around 10, Emily had realised that no matter what she did, she would never gain her mother's acceptance or approval. But despite knowing this, she'd continued to try. She'd married the richest, apparently best catch in the district, despite reservations. Yes, she could admit that now. She'd stayed at home and played wife, thrown the occasional elaborate lunch, afternoon tea, and dinner party. But every time Enid would find fault. And Enid was always invited because if she wasn't, she would sulk and subject Emily to the silent treatment and whatever other emotional blackmail tactics she could use. It was easier just to invite her and for Emily to accept she wouldn't be nearly as free to enjoy herself as if she were just amongst friends. There would be that slight edge to her mother's compliment. "Yes, Emily, it was a very nice meal." That really meant,
but not as nice as one of mine. And that was a spoken example. There had been plenty of down-the-nose looks over the years, too. Thank goodness her father was completely different. Whilst he didn't gush the words, Emily knew he adored her, no matter what mistakes she made in life. The bottom line was he just wanted her to be happy. "Are you okay? You're suddenly very quiet," Jake asked.
I'm fine. Just thinking about stuff.
Chapter 9. During lunch, Emily's phone rang and Barbara's name was on the screen.
Hey, what's up?
"I totally forgot to tell you about tomorrow. Are you okay to feed the guys? Sorry about the short notice."
God, did you do all the catering in time to pick me up at 8 yesterday? Jesus, how did you manage to do a whole day's shopping, including all the driving, and not collapse? Are you Wonder Woman or something? You should have asked me to help.
"What, and ruin the surprise? Not bloody likely."
Well, thank you so much. I owe you big time.
"I'll remember that," Barbara said with a laugh. "We couldn't have your reputation for fine food tarnished. You know Stephen Grant only agreed to do the work because they've heard shearers rave about your catering."
Oh, ha-ha, Barbara. You're hilarious, but I'll take a compliment any way I can get it.
"Hey, I'm not lying. You ask David next time you see him. They don't say a way to a man's heart is through his stomach for nothing, you know."
So now I have to live up to your even higher standards tomorrow? Please don't tell me you served them homemade Kitchener buns or anything too elaborate,"
Emily said with a groan. "Damn, wish I'd thought of that," Barbara said and laughed. "No, I just did chicken and salad sandwiches and apple tea cake for morning tea and meatloaf and salad and stewed nectarines with cream for lunch. Actually, you'd better check your ice cream supply. David mentioned they had that as well."
Okay, thanks. Sounds like I'll be doing a big shop this afternoon now anyway. What did you give them for afternoon tea? I don't want to serve anything the same and blemish this reputation I supposedly have,"
Emily said. "Carrot cake and ham, cheese and mustard sandwiches for the non-sweet tooths. You know, every time I do this sort of catering, like for shearing, I can't get over how much food they put away. All David brought home was empty dishes."
Well, Grace probably demanded her share as well.
"Probably. So I hereby hand catering duties over to you," Barbara said. "I look forward to wonderful reports tomorrow night from David."
No pressure. Let's hope there's still some fresh fruit and veg left in town. And seriously, thanks again for everything.
"My pleasure. I actually really enjoyed it. It took my mind off,
You're going to be fine, you know. Hey, why don't you come down and cook with me this afternoon or tomorrow if you want?"
Emily said. She loved it when the two of them cooked together. "Not a chance. I'm on strike. I've even got David cooking tea tonight." Emily laughed.
Fair enough. I'll let you go. Someone has a menu to go off and plan.
Good luck.
Thanks. See ya.
See ya.
Looks like my afternoon is spoken for,
Emily said to Jake as she put the phone back on the table.
I'm going to be cooking for you guys tomorrow.
Do you want some help?
Thanks, but I'll be fine. It's not hard, just takes time. But first I've got to go and do a big supermarket shop. Thank goodness they're opening to take advantage of everyone being in town for the big Australia Day breakfast and award ceremony.
Oh, how come we're not going?
Sorry. I didn't want to go, but I should have mentioned it. I used to go with John, but he always drank so much and...
It's okay. It doesn't matter, Em, he said, touching her arm. The different shopping hours are something I still have to get my head around, he continued, changing the subject. Most things in Melbourne tend to be open all day every day, including public holidays. So, do I get to come with you to the zoo? I mean, Wattle Creek? He said with a cheeky grin.
If you're very, very good,
Emily said, laughing. Although he'd been staying with her for more than 3 weeks, they still hadn't been into town together.
I'm sure you'll be spending a lot of time there over the next few months if we go ahead.
Yes, I'll need to know all the movers and shakers.
Well, start with Doris at Mitre 10. She knows everyone who's anyone in the building trade. Her cousin Will owns the place. You'll like him.
Duly noted, he said, tapping his head. So, do you want to head off now?
No rush. I need to plan a menu first and write a list, and I wouldn't mind going over this a bit more unless you've had enough for today,
Emily said. Never. It'll be great to nail down some details and get the plans drafted, he said, clearly excited. Emily found planning her menu easy. She had a few tried and tested favourites, which thankfully Barbara hadn't served. While she wrote a comprehensive shopping list, Jake tinkered with the rough floor plan of the cottage. Not that anything Jake did was rough, and looked over the figures. Emily couldn't believe how straight he could draw freehand. Years of practice, he said when she commented.
Right, she said. Tell me if you think this menu is okay and if there's anything you want to add.
She handed him her pieces of paper. Yum, 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 and yum, he said, making his way down the page and putting a tick next to each item. Looks wonderful.
And the shopping list?
Actually, I know it's naughty, but I'd love some barbecue chips.
Craving salty foods?
She lifted an eyebrow.
Isn't that one of the symptoms of adrenal fatigue?
After he'd told her about his condition, she'd got on Google one day while he'd been out with David. Thank goodness he hadn't shown any signs of another symptom, loss of sexual appetite. It could just be that I like them and haven't had them for ages. Can I have some, please? Can I, please? He pretended to whine like a child. Oh, ha-ha, Emily said, slapping playfully at his arm.
Of course you can, my love,
she cooed, and leaned over to kiss him. Don't start that, or else we'll never get to town, Jake groaned, and pulled away reluctantly. And I want to show you what I've come up with. They agreed the design should be as versatile as possible so that the building could cope with multiple uses. The original cottage had consisted of just 2 main rooms divided by a central hallway that opened onto a lean-to style extension housing a simple kitchen with a small bathroom off it. They were keeping the basic design but modernising and enlarging it. Instead of just a bullnose veranda on the front like the original cottage, they were planning to go right around, incorporating an outdoor living area beyond the kitchen. But of course, it all depended on how the budget looked down the track. Their finalised plan showed 4 large square rooms with a central hall. At the back, there was a sizable open-plan kitchen and living area, a laundry, 2 bathrooms, and a powder room. One of the bathrooms opened into one of the main rooms, which could be used as a master bedroom with ensuite if the building ever became a B&B or permanent residence. Emily was pleased to note that Jake had factored in wheelchair access. If she went ahead with the art gallery idea, the separate powder room would accommodate visitors, and the full-sized kitchen would be ideal for any functions they might have. The 4 rooms at the front would have high ceilings with large walls for hanging art and plenty of floor space for displaying sculptural pieces or whatever else she chose to sell.
I'm not sure about polished concrete floors. I had floorboards in mind.
Trust me, they'll look amazing. Not at all drab like those in the winery we were in the other week. Ours will sparkle. And be warm. You'd be surprised how efficient underfloor heating is.
Oh, I thought we'd have a wood heater or 2.
Emily's heart sank. She wanted the place to be classy, but also to have a country hominess about it, even if it was a business. Trust me, the novelty of real flames will wear off pretty quickly. It's very labour-intensive. And you'd be surprised how much more dust you'll end up with. Not something you want around paintings. Gas log fires in each room will give a nice ambience and extra heating when it's really cold and be labour-free. Also, gas is much cheaper than electricity.
Are you sure when you'll have big gas bottles to deal with?
Sorry?
Gas doesn't come by pipe or cable out here like water or electricity. You have to cart large bottles back and forth, or have it delivered. I'm not sure how much it costs.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that. I don't think it'll be a problem. And I'm sure it'll still be cheaper. We definitely want gas for the kitchen.
I'll have to take your word on that, too. I've only ever had electricity. Though I have heard that gas is what serious cooks prefer.
It's still a much better option than dealing with wood and ash for heating. I think electric hot water, especially if we're going to have to do gas in bottles. Trust me, Em. I know what I'm doing," he added, clearly noticing her concern.
Okay, I know. I'm sorry. I'll try not to question you so much. It's just that it's also new to me. I only want to be sure.
It's okay. And it's okay to question. You're spending a lot of money. You need to be sure and happy. But remember, it's a joint project. I'm going to be using this to advertise my business. Anything less than great will not be good enough." Emily relaxed. She would let herself trust him. He had years of experience and she had 0. And God, he was sexy when he was in business mode and all commanding. Jake explained that with careful thought to positioning and with thick walls, plenty of insulation in the ceiling and well-fitted doors and windows, the cottage wouldn't need air conditioning at all. It could always be added later if needed.
What about double glazing?
Emily asked. Easy enough to get a basic costing. Or we could go double laminate glass instead of the standard. I'll look into it, he said, making a note. Now, lights. I'm thinking downlights.
As in those little discs set into the ceiling?
Yes. What do you think?
They're very modern looking.
And perfect for an art gallery. You want nice, clean lines and unobtrusive views for art. If you go with pendants, they'll have to be really plain so they don't distract from the art anyway. And with downlights, you can change the direction to highlight pieces better and avoid shadows.
Fair enough, I guess.
Honestly, it's what all the galleries do.
Well, if I'm not allowed to have a central light in each room, I'm going to have a dirty great crystal chandelier inside the front door, she said with a harumph, and folded her arms in mock defiance. Jake laughed. That was actually going to be my next suggestion, he said. Emily felt a new burst of warmth flood through her at the thought that they weren't too far out of sync with their ideas. And if they ever were, he'd steer her right. She just had to have more faith. They chose a classic look with a neutral colour scheme for the bathrooms, powder room and kitchen. They both agreed that it was best to limit the use of bold colour to accents and objects that could be changed easily and relatively inexpensively. It had all yet to be costed, so they ran 2 lists, must-have and wish-list items. For instance, Emily wanted floor-to-ceiling tiles right throughout the bathrooms and toilet, but not if it meant she had to have an ordinary vanity and basin. She was very impressed at how much Jake knew about pricing and what was out there. She said she thought architects just did the design and plans, but he explained that he was a lot more hands-on than most architects. He also had some great contacts that would help to keep costs down and give good advice. But we'll try to source as much as we can locally, he said. I don't want to go upsetting the local businesses. Good idea. But we'll have to allow plenty in the budget for freight.
It wasn't that she thought Jake would forget anything, but she wanted to make sure they had as many costs factored in as possible, so as to avoid getting bitten down the track. Country people were at a considerable disadvantage compared to those living in the city, with freight adding significantly to the cost of almost everything. They had now finalised the hand-drawn plan and were ready to get the big, proper plans drawn up. They also had enough of an idea about the quality of the fit-out and a comprehensive list of what they would need in order to get a quantity surveyor involved. Emily had never heard of such a person, but Jake assured her it was the best way to go. Apparently, the woman he worked with would be able to come up with a pretty accurate costing even at this early stage. Emily didn't see how someone in Melbourne could cost something for Wattle Creek, given the extra freight involved and not knowing what was stocked locally, but, again, she had to trust Jake. She knew diddly squat about any of this stuff. Once the plans were done, Emily could put in a building application with council. They didn't anticipate any problems. Being out on a farm, there were no neighbours to be concerned about overshadowing. Development approvals on farms tended to be just exercises in rubber stamping, if there was an application put in at all. God, in Melbourne, planning and building approval can take years, depending on which council you're dealing with, Jake said.
With such a huge area geographically to police, there was no way the council would have the resources to check that all the sheds and outbuildings that popped up on farms had building approval. And no farmer would ever dob in another farmer. It just wasn't done. The whole place worked on a what goes around comes around philosophy. Emily had asked David about council regulations when they had first discussed moving the hay shed and had been told they should just let sleeping dogs lie. He was pretty sure John wouldn't have bothered with the mere formality of gaining approval in the first place. Oh, well, if it came back to haunt her, she'd worry about it then. Chapter 10. After an hour or so of discussion, they sat back in their chairs, satisfied with their progress. They'd now go and do the shopping, and then Emily would cook while Jake hunkered down in the office to start the ball rolling on the next phase. Emily was feeling very excited and positive about it all. What a great day. Suddenly they were startled by a brief knock followed by the hiss of the glass door sliding open. Emily and Jake exchanged quizzical expressions. "I'll get it," Jake said, getting up. Emily hoped it might be Barbara, despite her friend making no mention of a visit. In all her excitement, she'd forgotten to tell her about the cottage. She'd got sidetracked by the food. She looked forward to getting her friend's input. But she was going to have to stop referring to it as a cottage. The place was really quite big. Emily's smile faded when she heard her mother's voice. Part of her started emotionally searching for somewhere to hide. Fight or flight response. The feeling Jake had been living with almost constantly thanks to his adrenal fatigue. "Hello, Enid. Hello there, Des," Jake said. Enid entered the kitchen, followed by a sheepish-looking Des. Both were dressed smartly in crisp, neatly ironed shirts. Des, navy and white check, Enid, plain white and navy slacks. Des's wiry grey hair was standing up a little, as if he had been running his hands through it, but not a hair was out of place in Enid's grey bob. Jake came in after them. "Must remember to keep the door locked," Emily thought grimly. "Oh, there you are," Enid said. "Happy Australia Day?" "Hi, Mum. Hi, Dad. Come in," she said, getting up from the table. Her sarcasm was clearly lost on Enid, but not Des, who mouthed, "Sorry." Emily performed the air kiss ritual with Enid and then wrapped her arms around her father. "So what brings you by, Mum?" "We're on our way home from the ceremony. We went to Wattle Creek this year at the invitation of the Greens. We thought you might have been there." "I didn't feel like it this year." "Well, Jake might have enjoyed getting out and meeting some people. Not everything is about you, Emily." "We did discuss it, Enid, but I didn't actually feel up to it," Jake said. Emily's heart surged with gratitude. She really hadn't known what to say. "Oh, are you unwell? What brings you so far from home anyway, Jake? Surely not just to visit our Emily." "Why wouldn't he come especially to visit me? Thanks a bloody lot, Mum." "Oh, just a bit of a break in the fresh country air," he said, starting to look a little flustered. "So you haven't said what brings you by," Emily said. "You haven't been to visit, so we thought we'd come to you," Enid replied haughtily. "Do I have to make an appointment now to see my daughter, my only child?" "That would be preferable, yes." "So, are you going to offer your parents a seat and a cuppa, or just have us stand here like statues?" Emily shrugged and waved a hand as an invitation to sit down. "You sit, Em. I'll get the coffees." "Thanks, Jake. I'll have tea, please." As Emily sat down, she realised that her mother was peering at the plans they had been working on. Shit. She wished she'd thought to gather up the papers and stuff them in a drawer. Not that she'd had time. "Tea for me too. White with one, thanks, Jake," Des said, taking a chair. "Coffee for me, thank you. Milk, no sugar," Enid said. "Coming right up." Emily watched as Enid dragged the plans towards her and began scrutinising them. "Do I smell fresh paint?" Des asked. It was silent in the room except for Jake's rattling around at the nearby bench. "You do indeed, Dad. I'm doing myself an office," Emily said proudly.
Looks like you're doing more than that, Enid said in an accusatory tone as she jabbed a fingernail into the plan.
Uh-oh, here we go again.
Oh, that's something of mine, Jake said.
It's okay, Jake,
Emily said in practically a whisper.
It's actually a joint project,
she now said boldly, looking directly at her mother.
We're going to rebuild the cottage across the way, though it'll be considerably bigger than the original cottage.
Whatever for?
Because I want to. Because we want to,
Emily said, fully aware her chin was now jutting out stubbornly. And how much is that going to cost? Enid continued.
That's really none of your business, Mum,
Emily said, forcing the words to come out slowly and calmly. She noticed her father's eyebrows rose up a notch, felt a little guilty for him having to be part of this, but pushed it back. Well, it sounds like a silly idea to me. I thought you'd have learnt your lesson after that other dreadful house. The blood rushed to Emily's cheeks. She tried to remain calm.
Mum, it really makes no difference what you think. It's my idea, my money, and my life.
But Emily—
But nothing, Mum.
Enid, I'm sure Jake and Em know what they're doing, Des said. Emily was relieved when at that moment Jake delivered the mugs and sat down. Murmurs of thanks made their way around the table.
So who won the Citizen and Young Citizen of the Year for Wattle Creek? She ventured.
If you had any interest in your community, Emily, you would know, Enid said, making an exaggerated show of picking up her mug and taking a sip.
I really can't take a trick today, can I?
Emily said, putting on a laugh in an attempt to calm the situation. Emily, you can't possibly think this is a good idea, Enid said, jabbing at the papers again. You already have a perfectly suitable house.
Can we please just change the subject?
Emily said, desperately searching her mind for something benign to discuss. But, Emily, you're not being sensible. You need to think it through.
I have. We have, Mum.
Enid, I wouldn't be supporting Emily in this if it wasn't a viable proposition. I'm a not too shabby businessman, actually.
Well, you can't be a very good businessman if you think this is a good idea, and you barely know each other. Enid, Des warned. Clearly someone needs to be the voice of reason here.
Mum, please.
It's okay, Emily. Your mother is entitled to her opinion, Jake said, laying a hand on hers. Can we please just enjoy our cuppa and our time together? I've been looking forward to catching up. How can he be so calm? I want to knock her bloody head off.
I've lost my appetite, Enid said, putting her mug down and pushing it away with a sneer. She got up. Come on, Des, she said, gathering her handbag from the floor beside her. We've clearly caught Emily at a bad time. We'll visit again when she's in a better frame of mind. Emily fumed, but kept her mouth shut. Des Oliphant remained seated. Enid stood over him and tugged at his elbow. Des, now! We're leaving! The wall clock counted the passing seconds loudly in the silence. Finally, Des looked up at his wife. Actually, no, Enid. You can go, but I am not. I'm interested to hear about Emily and Jake's plans. You can wait in the car or come back later and pick me up. Or not. I can easily find my own way home. At this he shot Emily a slightly stricken look, which she answered with a nod. But, Enid, go. Just go. For a moment it looked like she was about to sit back down. Please don't, Emily pleaded silently. She so badly wanted this time with her father, and to give him a big hug and say thank you for standing up for her. Jake got up and followed Enid as she stomped out to the glass door. Although they were on the other side of a thick stone wall, their voices could be clearly heard. Emily wasn't surprised by what her mother said next, but she still cringed at Enid's nerve, even in obvious defeat. Jake, clearly Emily is suffering some sort of midlife crisis. Emily imagined Enid holding his arm and feigning sincerity. Though surely she's a little young for that. Anyway, whatever is causing her to be so willful needs looking into. I suggest you book her in to see the new psychologist, Jacqueline Havelock.
Emily is fine, Enid,
Jake replied in a pleasant, even tone. There was an audible harumph, and then the sound of the glass door whooshing and shutting with a bang, followed by the faint thud of court shoe heels on concrete. Jake returned and sat back down heavily at the table.
I'm sorry about all this, Des, Jake said.
Why are you apologising? Please, Jake, honestly, it's quite refreshing to hear Emily stand up to her mother. I'm afraid I've let her down on that score far too many times.
Well, you've certainly made up for it today, Emily thought, looking sympathetically at her father. Des looked gutted. Her heart lurched. It must be awful to be caught between the two women he loved, trying to be loyal to both at once. He was between a rock and a hard place, as Gran would have said. Emily wished it wasn't like this, but she certainly hadn't set out to provoke her mother. All she'd done wrong was not hide the evidence of the cottage project. Why couldn't Enid be supportive? She didn't have to agree or even understand, just nod politely and say, "It's your life, dear, whatever makes you happy." How hard was that?
I'm afraid Enid can be a bit insecure about her place in the world, Des continued. And any happiness or success Emily finds just seems to magnify it. I wish there was something I could do, but I'm afraid she's not going to change now. Maybe she's just too set in her ways.
He sighed deeply. Emily stared at him, wondering if he was actually thinking of leaving her mother after all these years. "I'm sorry I upset her, Dad. I didn't mean to." Des nodded and patted his daughter's hand in response. They cocked their heads slightly at hearing a car door slam, engine roar to life, and the spray of gravel. There was a collective breath of relief now they knew Enid wasn't outside waiting.
Looks like I might need to trouble you guys for a ride home, Des said, shaking his head.
Do you think she'll be back?
Jake asked. Des winced.
I doubt it.
He was obviously upset, but trying not to show it. "I have to go and shop for groceries anyway," Emily said. "I'll just get them in Hope Springs instead of Wattle Creek. They're open on the public holiday, aren't they?"
"Yes, so,"
Des said, clearly making an effort to be more upbeat.
"How about we start again? Tell me all about this exciting plan you have."
He looked from Emily to Jake and back again.
You tell the story, Em, and I'll fill in the gaps, Jake said.
As Emily showed her father the plans for the gallery, telling him all they had been discussing that day, she was pleased to hear his genuine enthusiasm. She wished her mother had shown the same excitement. Had Enid ever been excited for her? About anything? A wave of sadness swept through her before she could push it back.
"It sounds like a great idea," Des said. "I don't know much about art or any of that sort of thing, but I think something else for tourists to look at can only be good for everyone. There seem to be a lot more people traipsing over this way nowadays, thanks to the wineries and such. And I'll happily sit and chip some mortar off rocks if you can do with the help," he added.
"Careful what you offer, Dad," Emily warned.
"It'll be nice to get some fresh air and sunshine,"
he said with a wave of his hand.
"Though you might find I'm a bit of a fair-weather labourer. Honestly, if there's anything at all I can do to help you, I only have to ask," he added, patting Emily's hand. "Thanks, Dad. We'll let you know, though, as you can see, it's very early days yet." An image of them working together on the old house she'd rented from the Bakers crept into her mind. It had been a great bonding time, but it seemed so long ago. After half an hour, they offered to drive Des back to Hope Springs, since they hadn't heard from Enid and Emily really had to get to the shop before it closed. As they walked over to the shed where the car was garaged, she remembered the hay shed. So much had been running through her mind since seeing it, she'd forgotten to mention the wonderful surprise from that morning.
"Dad, there's something you have to see before you go," she said, changing the direction towards the newly erected frame, which was only 50 metres away but hidden by the large shed next to it. "David and Jake organised for the hay shed to be moved," she continued, practically skipping. "The iron is going on tomorrow after the footings have cured. It's so exciting. I only found out this morning. It was a total surprise." She stopped in front of the large steel structure and waited for her father and Jake to catch up.
"It'll be nice not to see it out of your bedroom window anymore," Des said, gazing at the steel shining in the sun. "Sounds like you're really settling in and making your mark on the place, Em. I'm so pleased for you," he said, draping an arm around her shoulders. "And I really appreciate all you're doing, Jake," he added. "I'm enjoying being here," Jake said, beaming at Emily. He grasped her hand and gave it a squeeze.
"Hey, Dad, you're welcome to come and hang out tomorrow while the guys are putting the iron on, if you've got nothing else to do," Emily said. "I'm making scones for morning tea," she added in an enticing tone.
"Oh, well, there's no way I can resist the call of your scones, Em. Count me in. But as long as I'm not going to be in the way," he added, looking at Jake. "You'll be no more in the way than this city boy," Jake said, smiling back. "Great, thanks. I'll come on by. Right about smoko time, I reckon," Des said, grinning cheekily. "Thanks very much for the ride. Time to see what sort of mood awaits," Des said wearily, as he got out of the car idling at the curb of Emily's parents' home. Emily wondered for a split second if she should go in and speak to her mother. Ordinarily, she would have. As they drove away, she thought about how much time and breath she'd wasted over the years being the adult to her mother's childish tantrums. Even more annoying was the realization of how Enid always managed to manipulate her into feeling that she was the one in the wrong. Not anymore. They parked in front of the small supermarket, but just as Emily was about to get out of the car, Jake placed his hand on her thigh. "I wanted to say this earlier, but I didn't want to embarrass your father. I'm so proud of the way you handled your mother today."
"Thanks, Jake. I don't think it'll make much difference, but I sure feel better for standing up for myself. If only she could see that not everything is about her," Emily mused.
"You did the right thing. You're a lot stronger than you give yourself credit for. Look at all you've had to deal with over the past few months."
"I'd rather not if you don't mind," she said with a laugh. "But thanks."
She leant over and kissed him before opening the car door and getting out. Chapter 11. The following morning, Emily kissed Jake goodbye when the first vehicle drove in, a friendly honk signalling its arrival. There wasn't time to go out and meet and greet. The first smoker would be around before she knew it, and she was already busy in the kitchen. She had planned a veritable feast stretching out over the day. Scones with jam and cream or cheese and tomato, and an assortment of sandwiches for morning tea, roast chicken, sliced ham and salad for lunch, homemade pasties, another different assortment of sandwiches, and buttered date loaf for afternoon tea. Back in the first year of their marriage, John had told her how important it was to serve good food during shearing. According to him, the best, most plentiful meals ensured their shed would receive priority the following year. If you served up average food, you were apparently relegated down the list, and the shearing team manager would send the slower, less experienced people. Emily had sometimes wondered if this was just something John had concocted to shift the blame if things didn't go his way. Perhaps people might put his shed last on the list simply because they objected to having abuse shouted at them. But what did she know? She'd been on the farm about 5 minutes in the scheme of things, and, as he had regularly reminded her, she was a born and bred townie anyway. The discussion of food for shearing, or rather his insistence she provide exceptional meals. He'd made it quite clear he wasn't interested in discussing it in any finer detail than that, was the closest John ever got to sharing farming facts with her.
She still didn't have a clue how many fleeces made up a bale or how many bales they might get from their flock. They were all things she should probably get up to speed with now. Apparently speed was everything when it came to shearing. It was a major job that few farmers enjoyed and many absolutely hated, and stretching it out just added to the annoyance. One of the things that would send John into a rage was if everyone had to come back for a half day to finish off. It had happened only once in her time, and as far as Emily could see, it wasn't really anyone's fault. She was actually just as inconvenienced as John was, through having to do more cooking, not to mention the additional cost of providing the extra few meals. It didn't sound like much, but as Emily had soon learnt, feeding 6 or 7 men 3 times a day really added up. If all went well today, the men would be finished cladding the shed by early evening. She had called David when they'd been in the supermarket the day before and offered dinner as well. But he'd phoned back a few minutes later to say that Steve and Grant had meetings that evening and wouldn't be able to stay. Since she wasn't paying them, she was even more determined than ever to feed the men well. She wondered how their wives felt about them working for her on their holidays. She'd have to put on a barbecue sometime later to thank everyone. It would be nice to get to know them better, and potentially useful if she was going to be running a business down the track. As Emily measured out the ingredients for the date loaf, she thought about how much fun she and Barbara had had cooking together. The company would have been nice, but she could totally understand Barbara's declaration of being on strike after all the work she'd done for the day before, especially whilst being pregnant. She hoped Barbara would have a nice, quiet day and rest up. Meanwhile, I'd better stop daydreaming and get cracking. Even though she was under pressure to get the meals out at certain times, the prospect of a day in the kitchen filled Emily with a sense of calm and serenity. She'd never understood why her mother claimed to hate cooking. As she sifted flour, Emily shook her head, remembering how Enid had briefly taken up jam making after Jake had raved about her own apricot jam. Barbara had suggested that Enid was just feeling threatened because Emily was good at something and trying to compete as a result. Emily had been a little annoyed. Lately, Enid seemed to copy everything she did, like getting her hair cut into the same chin-length bob. Ah, well, perhaps she'd tire of that like she had the jam. According to Des, 2 attempts tasting like burnt toffee had put an end to the jam hobby. At 9:30, Emily filled a large box with scones, fresh from the oven, plus pots of jam and cream and a variety of other sweet and savoury condiments. She added a Tupperware container of sandwiches, thermoses of tea and coffee, and all the requisite paraphernalia. "Come on, Gracie, let's go feed the hungry workers," she said, and left the house to carry it all down to the far end of the large rubble area flanked by corrugated iron sheds. The men seemed to be making great headway. In just a couple of hours they had already done half the roof. Below, the steel uprights remained naked. "Smoko time!" she called uselessly above the 2 idling tractors. She was relieved to see Jake driving one rather than involved in heavy labour. There was no sign of Des. He must have decided not to come after all. Clutching the box that was growing heavier by the second, she looked around for a place to lay everything out. Grace stood beside her, her tail wagging gently. Suddenly the tractors were turned off and silence reigned. "Here, I'll take that," David said, taking the box as Jake stepped down from his tractor and rolled a 44-gallon drum towards them. Emily would have loved a show of affection from her man, but he was clearly in worksite mode. He looked happy and in his element, though a little tired and drawn. "Thanks so much for doing this, you guys," she said to Steve, Grant and Bob as they brought 3 smaller drums over. "You're very welcome,"
said Bob, the older, slightly shorter and more thick-set of the 3, with a wave. Emily nodded back. She'd seen it plenty of times. When men had been working and their hands were dirty, instead of offering a hand to shake, they lifted one in greeting. "No worries," Grant added, scraping at the dirt with the toe of his boot. "Good to see a few things going your way. Steve and I are really sorry about snubbing you after, "All water under the bridge," Emily said to the pair of tall, lean agronomists.
Steve and Grant might have been difficult to tell apart, except for Grant's mop of light brown hair and Steve's short black spiky haircut. I just can't believe you do this for me during your time off. It's amazing. Thank you.
It's just a couple of days, and we do far too much sitting behind a desk or driving around these days, so it makes a good change, eh, Grant?
Steve said.
Yep, sure does.
Well, it means the world to me. So again, thank you, Emily said, feeling a sudden rush of emotion grip her.
So is it going to be for hay?
Grant asked. Up to David, he's running the place. I'm not sure if he's planning to cut hay down here this year. He might use it for storing equipment. But don't worry, it'll be put to good use one way or another.
Well, at least it's in a much better spot now. I don't know what John was thinking,
Bob said. The men passed around a small bottle of hand sanitizer, and David laid the first of 2 small checked tablecloths on one of the tall drums.
Who's for tea and coffee? He asked.
There's Milo too, Emily said.
Or Milo,
David added.
Tea, thanks,
Steve and Grant said together.
Coffee for me, thanks,
Bob said.
Milo, thanks,
Jake said as he brought another couple of smaller drums over and put them in the centre of the semicircle.
This all looks great. Are you staying, Em?
David asked, raising a mug and wiggling it at her. Emily had packed extra food and a mug, but until that moment she hadn't been sure whether to join them or not. She actually didn't feel as out of place as she thought she might. Sure, why not? Tea, thanks. White with 1. She sat down on a drum.
I'll let you do the doctoring,
David said, leaning over and putting the jars of milk, sugar and teaspoons onto the cloth Jake had just draped across 2 of the smaller drums. He passed out plates and serviettes, then put the basket of scones and condiments and knives on one drum and the box of egg sandwiches on the other. Emily accepted the hot mug and took a scone. She liked having the men waiting on her. Just then they all turned at the sound of an approaching vehicle. Des Oliphant got out and made his way over.
Ah, good. Not too late, I see,
he said, grinning and rubbing his hands together. He gave Emily a quick hug and shook hands with each of the men, greeting them by name.
Don't worry, fellas, I'm not here to check up on your work. I'm quality control for the catering,
he added jovially, and took a seat on the last remaining empty drum. Cheeky bugger, Emily thought with a smirk as she sipped her tea. It was good to see him looking cheerful. Hopefully that meant Enid hadn't given him too much of a tongue-lashing. There was a collective chuckle and hum of voices as the small group settled down to the food, murmuring with relish about how good it was. As Emily walked back to the house with Grace trotting along beside her, she wondered what Steve, Grant and Bob must think about her being shacked up with another bloke so soon after the death of her husband. But she shook the thought aside. Like Barbara had said often enough, she couldn't control what people thought or what they said behind her back. Anyway, she had done nothing and wasn't doing anything wrong. Jake had been staying with her for just over 3 weeks and still hadn't been with her to collect the mail or groceries in Wattle Creek. She wasn't consciously hiding him, but she was pleased she'd been spared a little while from becoming the focus of gossip all over again. Though Enid was bound to have told someone by now, if only to utter her disapproval. Anyway, Emily was sure someone from Wattle Creek would have seen them together in Hope Springs the day before. So word was definitely already making its way around the district. And now that Steve, Grant and Bob had been here... Oh, well, maybe the sooner the tongue started wagging, the sooner they would stop. Chapter 12. Emily was just finishing repacking the box after afternoon tea, unsure if it would be needed again or not, when her mobile began to ring. She dragged it off the bench and stared at the screen. Cousin Liz. She sighed and sat down. She wasn't sure why, but for some reason she didn't feel like talking to Liz. Emily had always got on well with her cousin. At Gran's funeral they'd had a great heart-to-heart,
and Liz had encouraged her to leave John, even offering a haven in Melbourne if necessary. But she hadn't liked the way Liz had behaved towards Jake when they had visited, and she really didn't fancy being quizzed about their relationship and why he was back there again. Jake had assured her there had been nothing between him and Liz, but they both knew she had feelings for him. It was naive to think that Liz hadn't been in touch with her mother and that Peggy hadn't been in touch with Enid and that they didn't all know the latest details of Emily's life. Oh, Liz would know everything all right. How would she feel about her plain, unsophisticated country cousin ending up with the man she'd wanted? Liz was competitive through and through. There was no doubt how she had done so well in her career as a business analyst, whatever that entailed. Emily toyed with not taking the call, but just as she'd decided she'd let it go to voicemail, she found her finger scooting across the screen and answering.
"Hi, Liz,"
she said, more brightly than she felt. "How's things?" "What's this I hear about Jake being over there?" Emily was taken aback at her cousin's abrupt manner. Uh-oh.
"Yes, he's here. He's having a country break."
"Are you two an item now?"
"Yes, we are, actually."
"Oh, right. And what's this I hear about you being in Melbourne and not even calling me?"
"I wanted to, but Jake said you were overseas at a conference or something."
"It was then you were here," Elizabeth said, a little subdued.
"It was a spur-of-the-moment thing."
"It's not like you to be so spontaneous." Emily could picture the sneer on her cousin's face, and God, she sounded like Enid.
"Oh, well, maybe I'm changing."
"So why the rushed trip?"
"Jake was going to a funeral. I went along for moral support."
"I could have done that, saved you the bother."
"It wasn't any bother, Liz. And you were away, remember?"
Liz didn't seem to have a response to that. "So who died?"
"A business acquaintance. Nobody you know, I should imagine."
Emily hoped she was saying all the right things. Really, this was a conversation Liz should be having with Jake.
"How was the conference?"
she asked. "Bit boring, but not the worst I've been to. At least the hotel was 5-star. So, I hear you've moved back to the farm. Mum told me about John's accident. And I hear you're rich. Quite the turnaround."
"Not exactly rich, but if I'm careful, I should be okay."
"I know plenty of money men and women if you want some financial advice. I can do some introductions if you like," Liz said.
"Thanks, but I'm fine,"
Emily said. "And what would you know about investing wisely?"
"Geez, don't hold back, Liz,"
Emily said. "Sorry, I'm just trying to look out for you."
"I'm fine. The bank here is helping me, and I have Jake for advice if I need it."
"That does sound serious," Liz said with a tight laugh. "We are," Emily thought, but didn't say it. "Remember, he's an architect and builder, Emily, not an expert in money matters," Liz said.
"Was there something particular you wanted, or did you just call to give me a hard time?"
"I heard about the cottage," Liz said, hesitating. Uh-huh. So she's been instructed to talk me out of it. "Why don't you just put up a cute little wooden hut if you want extra accommodation? It'd be a lot cheaper."
"And what business is it of yours?"
"Well, it's not really. I just don't want you blowing your money or something silly." The words could have come straight out of Enid's mouth, and the tone was pretty spot on as well. Emily fumed.
"What, you'd rather I blew it on some get-rich-quick scheme instead?"
"You at least need to get your money working for you, and you don't want to overcapitalise. You'll never get your money back if you sell."
"I'm not going to sell,"
Emily said. "What, you're going to stay out there in the sticks and play at being a farmer?"
"Is that what my mother told Peggy to tell you to say? Surely you've got enough going on in your own life without wasting time being messenger for our mothers. You need to grow up, Liz, and stop playing this silly game of theirs."
"Gosh, we are a little touchy, aren't we?"
"What are you talking about?"
"Things not working out so well with Jake?"
"Everything is working out perfectly well between Jake and myself, actually,"
Emily said.
In fact, he's thinking of staying permanently, perhaps even setting up an agency here. Not that it's any of your business.
Damn. She knew she'd said too much. It wasn't her story to tell. Liz would now go back to Aunt Peggy with her news, and Peggy would spread it back to Enid. God only knew what information would get changed along the way. Chinese whispers indeed. Clearly I've caught you at a bad time, Liz said cautiously.
No, not at all. But I don't see why you're wasting your money and both of our time by phoning to quiz me about my life, only to then put it down.
I'm not.
Oh, really? Not once have you said, Em, I'm sorry the other house didn't work out, or Em, I'm really pleased your financial situation has eased, or Em, I'm happy that you've hit it off with Jake, or Em, isn't it great that life is finally starting to treat you better? Not once have you ever called just to say hi or be supportive. You only ever call when you want something, whether it's to stay so you can try and impress Jake, or whether it's to appease your mother or mine, or to somehow make yourself feel better by hearing all about my poor, sad life.
She was ranting, but she couldn't stop.
Well, I've had enough, Liz. You use people. You can deny your feelings for Jake all you like, hint that he's gay and all the other crap you pulled when you stayed, but the truth is you're jealous. You're jealous because he's chosen me over you, and you're jealous of the fact that I have a more meaningful life than you because I'm not obsessed with money and impressing people who don't really matter.
She was becoming a little breathless, but she blundered on.
Well, Liz, you can't compete with me or lord it over me or whatever you're trying to do, because that game takes two to play and I'm not interested in playing it. I don't care about flash cars, posh restaurants, five-star hotels, designer clothes, or being seen in the hippest Melbourne cafe sipping on a latte. If that makes me the poor country hick cousin, then fine, that's what I am. But that's my choice, and it's none of your business or your mother's, or even my mother's for that matter.
Suddenly, Emily stopped. She was struggling for air. There was silence on the other end of the line.
I've got to go,
Emily said after a moment.
I don't need this. I've grinned and put up with all this crap for long enough.
And with that, she hung up. Her face was flaming. She felt exhilarated, a little light-headed, and a wee bit guilty. It was the closest she'd ever got to hanging up on someone. She ran her hands through her hair. God, what's happened? You okay? Jake asked, full of concern. Shit. He must have come in mid-rant because she hadn't heard the sliding door.
No, I'm bloody wild.
What's happened? He sat down.
Bloody Liz. I wish I didn't let her get to me, but she pushes my buttons every time. I guess this time I cracked,
she said, smiling weakly. Well, she can be pretty full on, Jake said, choosing his words carefully. Emily held her hands up.
I know she's a good friend of yours, but she's a backstabbing, smarmy, manipulative bitch who only thinks about herself.
Yep, she's all of that and more, Jake said thoughtfully. He shuffled his chair closer and put his arm around her. What did she say to upset you?
I don't know,
Emily said, exasperated.
She was going on about how the cottage is over-capitalising or something.
Like she'd know, Jake said.
Can't she just be pleased that I'm doing something that makes me happy?
She's jealous of us too, right? Jake asked.
I think so.
Emily, she's jealous of you. You're naturally beautiful.
Yeah, right.
Let me finish, he said, holding up a hand to her. You're naturally beautiful. You don't go in for all the makeup, fancy clothes,
because I can't afford to,
she started, but was halted by Jake's steely, warning gaze. You know who you are and you're content. You don't feel the need to impress people. You're like, right, here I am. If you don't like it, then bugger off. Actually, that's pretty recent. He was right that she no longer felt the need to impress people, but she had spent years desperately seeking her mother's approval and had always wanted to make John happy. You're you, Em. You're real. What you see is what you get.
That's what I love most about you. I think deep down Liz envies you. She tries to distract everyone with flash window dressing, but I think underneath it all is a pretty insecure, unhappy person.
So why are you friends with her? Not that it really matters.
I suppose I feel a bit sorry for her. For a long time, I didn't see her for what she really is. Actually, it's spending time with you that's done it. In fact, the very first time I met you, I saw how comfortable you were in your own skin, despite everything you were going through.
Come on, I was a complete bloody basket case,
Emily said with a laugh. But it was lovely to have someone saying such nice things about her. No, you weren't. You were the perfect host. Warm, friendly, welcoming. To a complete stranger at that.
Well, you were a friend of Liz's.
And even though she was a complete cow most of the time, pretending to flirt with me or making me out to be gay, you kept your cool. Don't think I didn't notice what was going on. Emily's eyes were wide.
And you just smiled and put up with it. I've done that a lot in my life.
And it's part of your charm. But you don't need to pretend with me. Now you're getting your life sorted out, you need to concentrate on standing up for yourself.
God, I was a bit rude,
Emily said, a little sheepishly. And she probably deserved it.
Why can't they just say, you know what, whatever makes you happy. If you're happy, we're happy.
Emily was annoyed to find her eyes filling with tears. She swiped roughly at them with the back of her hand. Of course, what she really meant was, why can't Mum say these things? Poor Liz. She probably wasn't as bad as Emily was making out. They'd had good times over the years. Her timing was just bad. Or was it good? Barbara would say that the universe was in charge. She wouldn't have said these things to her cousin if she wasn't meant to. Well, this is why they say you can choose your friends but not your family, Jake said kindly, and passed her a clean but crumpled tissue from his pocket. It's just lucky you've got me and Barbara and David and your dad. We all love you just the way you are, he added, pulling her to him.
Thanks, Jake,
she said, hugging him.
I probably should phone her back,
Emily said quietly. Why not wait a while? Hopefully she'll go off and think carefully about what you said. Maybe she'll call you.
I doubt it,
Emily said thoughtfully, and fell silent. Hey, want to see the progress on your bright, shiny shed? He asked, getting up.
Oh, you haven't finished?
Almost, but not quite. Just a half day tomorrow. So I'm afraid more food is required, he added with an apologetic shrug.
That's no problem. Small price to pay for all everyone's doing.
She got up and allowed herself to be led outside. As they were halfway across the expanse of rubble, first Steve, then Grant, and then Bob drove past. They slowed down and waved from their open windows. See you tomorrow.
Thanks very much. See you then,
Emily called back. When they got to the worksite, Des and David were packing tools into big aluminium boxes and winding up extension cords. Emily stared at the huge shed looming up in front of her. They were almost done. If only everyone had stayed until dark, they might have finished. But she couldn't be frustrated. A lot of people were doing her a huge favour, and it was probably safer to finish when they were fresh rather than rushing and working in poor light.
It looks fantastic, she said enthusiastically.
You've made great headway this afternoon.
Would have loved to have got it finished, David said.
Oh, well, there's no great rush. Are you coming back tomorrow, Dad?
Not sure. What are you cooking? Des Oliphant replied with a lopsided grin.
Oh, trust you, she said with a laugh and playfully made a swipe at his arm. Give me a chance to think about it. I've only just found out there's more to be done.
Well, whatever it is, I reckon it'll be worth the trip, Des, Jake said, putting an arm around Emily's shoulders.
Add a bit of pressure, why don't you?
She said, turning her head and kissing him firmly on the cheek. Oh, look at the time, Des said, checking his watch.
Better get home before her ladyship sends out a search party.
He shook Jake and David's hands and gave Emily a tight hug.
See you tomorrow around smoko time,
he added, laughing as he got into his ute. They waved him off in silence.
Would you like a beer for the road?
Jake said to David.
I'd offer dinner, but I'm sure Barbara is waiting for you,
Emily said.
Thanks, but I'd better get cracking. I'll pass on the beer, thanks, Jake. It might go down too well. Better stick to the water. See you tomorrow morning.
Okay, see ya. Drive safe,
Emily said. He got into his ute and they waved him off before turning and walking slowly, arm in arm, back to the house. Chapter 13. The next morning, Emily and Jake enjoyed a light but lingering breakfast chatting about the cottage. They just couldn't stop calling it that. They had finished tidying the kitchen and Emily had returned to flicking through magazines for ideas when they heard the familiar, friendly toot of David's ute. Jake kissed Emily goodbye, got up and left the kitchen. Emily watched him putting on his boots at the door, feeling dreamy and blissful. She finally had a great man in her life who respected her and treated her well. And they were about to embark on a great project together. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed Grace get up from her spot under the cupboard to follow Jake. Emily called her back in a commanding tone. The downcast look the dog gave her as she trotted back in and lay back down made her feel mean, but she stuck to her guns. It just wasn't safe for her to be out where there might be tractors driving, things being dropped, and size 10 boots stomping around. And it wasn't fair on the workers to be keeping an eye out for her all the time. Grace could go with her when she took the food down like she had the previous day.
Yoo-hoo!
She tilted her head at hearing a woman's voice. Mum? Emily frowned. She couldn't bear Enid bursting her bubble now when she was feeling so good. She stared at her magazine, annoyed at how just one thought could send her mood plummeting.
Good morning,
Barbara called as her head popped around the kitchen door.
Oh, wow, hi,
Emily said, leaping up and almost knocking her chair over backwards in the process.
I wasn't expecting you. What a lovely surprise,
she said as she embraced her friend.
Thought you might like a hand with feeding the chaps,
Barbara said with a cheeky grin.
Thought you said I was on my own. Yeah, I might have said something like that. But the truth is, I'm avoiding doing the housework, she added sheepishly. And I missed you. Well, I'm happy to have the company.
As Emily reached for the tea and coffee things, Barbara sat down on the chair Jake had vacated.
What's all this?
She asked, peering at the paperwork strewn about.
Looks a lot more than just an office reno,
she added, picking up the house plan.
We've decided to rebuild the cottage, only bigger. How cool's that? Jake's thinking of setting up an agency for his business here, and he thought the building would be a good display to show people.
Pretty hefty sample, Barbara said.
Well, I'm thinking I might run it as an art gallery. Not that I know much about art, but I do know what I like and don't like, and that's half the battle, right?
I thought you wanted to run a B&B.
I've changed my mind. I decided I don't want to be waiting on people hand and foot.
Fair enough. Dealing with the public can be hard work. I didn't work for long as a hairdresser, but it was enough for me.
But I reckon it'd be different running a gallery, though,
she hastily added.
I'm going to call it the Button Jar.
Great name!
You don't think I'm taking on too much?
Girls got to have a hobby. And with all the antiques shops and cellar doors popping up, it's only a matter of time before art galleries and homewares shops are in demand too. You're smart to get in early, Barbara said.
Well, it might take up to a year to get it all set up.
Everyone has to start somewhere. I'm sure it'll be a roaring success. And it sounds like things are getting pretty serious with Jake.
Yes. You don't think it's too soon, do you?
Do you?
Yes and no. I think it's probably too soon, but it doesn't really feel like it is.
There's your answer. Go with your heart. It doesn't matter what I think or anyone else.
I feel like I've known him forever and that I can totally trust him. I'm so lucky.
She beamed at Barbara. He sure is a lovely man, and you deserve to be happy.
Emily reluctantly dragged herself out of her love-struck daze. Can you look over the plans and see if there's anything you think we've missed? As if you and Jake would have missed anything, Barbara said, rolling her eyes. But I am a very inquisitive creature, so I'm dying to take a gander. They were silent for a few minutes while Emily got their teas and Barbara looked over the documents. So, what do you think? Emily asked, putting their mugs on the table. Brilliant. Can't fault it. It gives great options for down the track. You could always rent it out if you decide you don't like running a business, or live there yourself. Well, I can't take any credit. It's all Jake, really. Barbara shrugged. Whatever you say. I love it. I took a wee bit of convincing about polished concrete, but Jake assures me it'll look great. You can always put carpets down if you don't like it. Oh, just the thought of shopping for Persians makes my mouth water, Barbara said, and actually wiped her hand across her lips. We'll see, Emily said. Anyway, I bet it won't take you long to get used to it. And it'll elevate it into chic rather than just country. Not that you need to. From the sounds of things, it's going to be one for the pages of Belle or Home Beautiful. So why an art gallery and not a homewares shop? Barbara asked. I want to give Jake and his sister Simone somewhere to exhibit. She's so talented. And I want to thank her for bringing Jake and me back together and for all she did with the jam. You should see her work. Gorgeous, huge paintings of flowers. Like the ones we have in our hall at home? Not really, though yours are lovely too. Simone's are very modern-looking, bright and unframed. She uses quite thick paint, so they seem to almost stand off of the canvas. I think it's what they call impressionist. I'm really going to have to bone up on art terms. Anyway, I just hope she doesn't think it's like charity or something, Emily added, sipping on her tea. Have you told Jake? What did he say? He's not keen to exhibit, but I've got plenty of time to work on him. Anyway, if one or both of them don't want to show, I'm sure there are plenty of good unknown artists out there. I don't think it'll be a problem. Careful, or else Enid will suddenly be an artist wanting representation, Barbara said with a laugh. Speaking of which, Emily said, we had a bit of a moment. Oh? She and Dad dropped in out of the blue the other day. Jake and I had all this spread out on the table. God, I can imagine she was none too impressed, Barbara said, inclining her head slightly and raising her eyebrows. She said it was a silly idea, blah, blah, blah. Jake, bless him, leapt in to say it was something he was working on, but something in me snapped and I let her have it. Really? What did you say? Barbara asked cautiously. Not a lot in the general scheme of things. I just pointed out that it's none of her business how I spend my money or what I do with my life. You're absolutely right. I'll never win with her. And she stormed off, leaving poor Dad here with no ride home, Emily said with a tight laugh.
This is the end of CD3. The book continues on CD4.